Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere you probably shouldn't be. Because you probably won't survive this. Not even a little bit. Not unless you've got 3 layers of reindeer hide, a stove burning 24 hours a day, and the sheer willpower of someone who thinks walking to an outhouse in -70 is a normal part of life. Welcome to the coldest inhabited place on Earth. And no, it's not Antarctica. At least not the way people live in this story. We're going deep into the heart of Siberia, to a frozen pocket of the world where everything cracks, freezes and stays that way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you wrapped in a blanket in Phoenix at 10 PM, or brushing your teeth in Stockholm at 2:15 AM? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in a place that looks like it's been photoshopped to remove warmth. The trees stand motionless, their branches so frozen they creak like old wood with every breath of wind. The snow doesn't glisten. It's too dry, too powdery, and it doesn't melt when you touch it. Instead, it crunches beneath your boots like crushed glass. Even sound seems muffled here, like the air itself is tired of moving. This is Oymyakon, Siberia, the coldest permanently inhabited place on the planet. Right now, you're standing in a valley shaped like a bowl, where frigid air settles and refuses to leave. The temperature? Tonight, a brisk -96 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than the surface of Mars on most days, and it's only 7 PM. Your eyelashes start to freeze together within minutes. Your breath comes out in thick plumes that instantly crystallize into a delicate mist. Even the inside of your nose starts to crunch a little when you breathe in too fast. And that smartphone in your pocket? Completely useless. The battery gave up somewhere between welcome to and you trying to take a selfie. Electronics hate this kind of cold. Ink freezes, plastic shatters, and your hands? Well, you might want to keep those buried in your mittens unless you enjoy watching your fingers turn white in real time. This isn't just a cold night, it's the cold night. January 26th, 1926, or, depending on who you ask, a record-setting night in 1933. When thermometers in Oymyakon allegedly dipped as low as -96.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's -71.2 degrees Celsius, if you're metric-minded. Of course, there's an ongoing feud about the exact numbers, and we'll definitely get into that later. But for now, just know this. Humans weren't designed to be here. And yet, here you are. The funny thing is, it doesn't even feel like weather anymore. It feels like the world has stopped. The skies are deep, inky blue, scattered with stars that feel weirdly close. There's no wind tonight, which you'd think is a blessing, but it makes everything eerily still. No birds, no animal sounds, just the distant hiss of a chimney pipe and your own footsteps, which sound much louder than they should. Now here's a weird fact to throw into your brain. In these temperatures, your spit can freeze before it hits the ground. People in Oymyakon sometimes test how cold it is not with a thermometer, but by tossing hot water into the air and watching it poof into ice crystals instantly. That's not a party trick, that's survival science. You step into a wooden cabin where your host waves you inside without a word. He's bundled in layers of wool and fur that make him look 3 times his actual size. Inside, the air is thick and heavy with wood smoke. There's a roaring stove in the corner, crackling away with birch logs that smell slightly sweet. The windows are covered with thick frost on the inside. No insulation. Just layers of felt and old Soviet-era curtains trying their best. The warmth hits your skin like a hug and a slap at the same time. It stings a little. That's normal. You've got capillaries doing backflips as your body tries to figure out what season it is again. Your host hands you a tin cup of something hot. It's not coffee, not tea, just water. Because water is sacred here. Everything freezes. Pipes, wells, lakes. You drink it slowly, letting the steam fog up your cheeks. And then quietly he laughs. Not at you. Just at the whole absurdity of life here. He's lived through so many of these nights that -60 feels like a cool breeze. You glance at his bookshelf. Yes, even out here there are books. And spot a small framed photo of a thermometer bottomed out completely. Glass cracked. Mercury frozen. It's a badge of honour. There's an open debate among historians and scientists about whether this night truly holds the record. Some say a 1990s reading in Verkhoyansk may have been colder. Others point to a remote spot in Antarctica with an unofficial low. But here's the thing. No one lives full-time on a glacier in Antarctica. People live here. They have schools, stores, outhouses, we'll get to those, and they even host a local beauty pageant, held hilariously outdoors. Outside, the stars shine so brightly it almost hurts to look at them. The cold air is perfectly clear, like glass, and under that star-scattered dome, you can't help but feel like you've stepped out of time. No notifications, no traffic, just you, wrapped in borrowed furs, standing on a night that makes the history books look like science fiction. And you're just getting started. Tomorrow you'll learn how the villagers melt snow for drinking, how vehicles are either run constantly or frozen solid, and why local dogs have thicker coats than polar bears. But for now you sit beside the fire listening to logs snap in half from sheer dryness and realise you've survived the first hour, only 11 more to go. Outside the darkness hasn't moved an inch. There's no sunrise on the horizon, no hint of morning. It's just cold and dark and quiet. Your host stokes the stove with a kind of practiced rhythm that tells you he's done this 1,000 times. He doesn't wear gloves inside, but his hands are red and cracked in a way that says frostbite once flirted with them and lost. The room smells like pine tar, smoke, and something meaty simmering in a blackened pot. This is survival, yes, but it's also just normal life. You step back outside for a moment and instantly regret it. The door sticks from frost and the wood groans in protest. Your breath turns into a little puff of glitter that hangs in the air like a miniature cloud, then vanishes. You blink and your eyelashes feel tacky. That's not your imagination. Eyelid frost is a thing. Blink too slowly and you risk gluing your eyes shut with nature's most inconvenient party trick. You've officially entered the twilight zone of cold, where the laws of physics start behaving like they're on vacation. The village of Oymyakon sits nestled in the Russian Republic of Serka, also known as Yakutia, and calling it a village is generous. It's more of a loose scattering of houses and sheds, separated by crunchy snow and eternal dusk. There's one school, one small store, and a lot of wood smoke curling up into the frozen air. The reason this place even exists? That's a longer story. It was originally a seasonal stopover for nomadic even herders, a place with a hot spring where reindeer could rest in winter. Then came the Soviet era, and with it, forced settlement. By the 1930s, the USSR decided it was a great idea to move people into the harshest corners of Siberia. Mining, labour camps, weather stations, you name it. Cold didn't matter. You had a job, and you stayed. You walk slowly past a sign that marks the record low temperature, -71.2 degrees Celsius. It's mounted proudly next to a rusty thermometer that looks like it hasn't worked since the Cold War. This is where a man named Sergei Obruchev recorded the lowest ever temperature for an inhabited location in 1926. Except, of course, there's still that squabble with Verkhoyansk about who owns the Cold Crown. It's a frosty feud between neighbours that spans decades and a whole lot of frostbitten pride. You pass an old woman trudging through the snow with a bucket. Her scarf is wrapped tightly around her head, and only her eyes are visible, squinting out like a frostbitten babushka ninja. She gives you a look that says, tourist, then nods once and disappears into a curtain of mist that used to be air. That bucket she's carrying? It's not full of water, it's empty. She's heading to the frozen river to chip off chunks of ice to melt later. Because fun fact, the pipes in Oymyakon, they're pretty much decorative in winter. Underground plumbing doesn't survive in permafrost. Water has to be hauled or melted from snow, stored in big barrels near the stove and rationed like gold. You follow the same trail toward the Indigirka River, except river is misleading right now. It's solid. You could land a plane on it if you wanted. The locals do, actually, sometimes, when they need a makeshift runway. The air here is even colder, if that's possible. Your scarf freezes in place across your mouth. Your knees feel stiff. It's the kind of cold that makes you question whether your bones are still inside your body. You're just a meat popsicle with a pulse. And yet, people live. Kids go to school here. There's a diesel generator keeping the lights on. Someone is probably fixing a snowmobile right now with their bare hands, cursing in 3 languages. It's absurd, it's admirable, it's Oymyakon. A local guy, maybe 20-something, offers to show you his truck. You follow him behind a barn-like structure where his UAZ van, a chunky Soviet beast built like a toaster, has been idling all night. Why? Because if it turns off, it may never start again. Batteries die in minutes. Oil thickens to the texture of molasses. Even the gas can freeze if you're not careful. So the rule here is simple. Keep it running. Always. He grins and slaps the hood like it's a faithful dog. It makes a weird metallic clunk, like the engine is trying to scream from inside a block of ice. You notice the tyres look a little squished. That's not your imagination either. Rubber becomes rock hard in this temperature. Driving feels like riding on cinder blocks, and steering requires the strength of a small bear. Still, the engine hums, purring like a frozen kitten. The man explains, via lots of hand gestures and some broken English, that he uses a blowtorch on the fuel lines every morning. You nod like this is normal, like you use a blowtorch on your Prius at home when it gets a little chilly. Later, back inside the cabin, you finally ask the question that's been floating around in your mostly frozen brain. How do people survive this every year? Your host shrugs. Then he gestures to his coat, his stove, and his dinner. That's the secret. Layers, heat, calories. Repeat. It's not about beating the cold, it's about outlasting it. Dinner is a mystery meat stew that smells better than anything has a right to in this temperature. It's mostly reindeer, maybe some boiled fish, definitely some fat. Lots of fat. Your body needs it here. Calories are currency, and fat is your internal insulation. You eat slowly, hands cradling the hot bowl like it's life itself. Here's your historical fact for the night. Oymyakon school only closes when the temperature drops below minus 61 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 52 degrees Celsius for younger children, and below minus 63 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 53 degrees Celsius for older ones. That's right. Anything warmer than that, and you're going to class, no excuses. And now your quirky fact. Locals sometimes dry their laundry outside on a clothesline, where it freezes into stiff, ghostly shapes. Once frozen, they just smack the clothes and the frost falls right off. It's laundry and therapy in one violent swing. But here's a scholarly curiosity to chew on. Some climatologists argue that Oymyakon's location in a deep sheltered valley may not have actually recorded the lowest possible global temperature. There may be unmeasured colder spots, especially in Antarctica's dry valleys or on the Greenland ice sheet. But none of those places have a cafe serving hot deer soup, so they don't count. You curl up under thick, scratchy blankets, your cheeks still pink from the cold. The stove creaks. The wind outside has picked up just slightly, making the eaves whisper like old ghosts. Your toes are warm, for now, and somehow, in a place where nothing should survive, you're still breathing. Welcome to the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Sleep tight, you wake up to darkness. Not darkness like nighttime in the city, where there's always a street lamp or glowing billboard. This is full, crushing, middle-of-nowhere darkness, like the sky has swallowed the sun whole and refused to spit it back out. The only light is from the dying embers of the stove, still glowing faintly orange behind its iron door. Your breath fogs the air in thin curls, even inside the cabin. You roll over and hear a quiet crunch. Ice forming on your blanket. Cozy. You don't have a phone to check the time. You don't even have a clock. Time is more of a suggestion here. Just a gentle nudge from nature that says, hey, the chickens are clucking, or your eyelashes are freezing again. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiffness in your joints, like your body's been vacuum sealed in cold. The wooden walls of the cabin have frosted from the inside, and your boots, left a little too close to the door, are now rock solid. Good luck with that. As you layer up again, thermal underwear, wool socks, fur-lined pants, thick mittens, one scarf for your neck, and another just for your nose, you can't help but wonder, why did people ever settle here? Who looked at this frozen abyss and said, yes, this seems like a good spot to raise a family? Turns out, like so many things in history, it starts with someone being forced to. Before permanent settlement, the area around Oymyakon was mainly used seasonally by the Even people, nomadic reindeer herders who were smart enough to move away when winter really set in. They'd camp near the local hot springs, using the relatively warm ground to graze their animals and rest. The name Oymyakon itself likely comes from a word that means non-freezing water, which is hilarious now considering what it's known for. But during the Stalinist era of the 1930s, the Soviet Union had other plans. In the grand tradition of making everything harder than it needed to be, the USSR began encouraging, or, let's be real, forcing settlement into remote Siberia. Some people came here by choice, lured by state programs offering land and jobs. Others, not so much. Political prisoners, exiles, gulag labourers, They were sent where no one else wanted to go. The idea was simple: develop every inch of the motherland, no matter how frozen it was. Mining towns popped up, roadwork projects began, weather outposts were established to monitor conditions in this icy void. The region became part of the Soviet machine, complete with infrastructure, collective farms, and schools that taught Lenin before they taught how to build a fire. Oymyakon was no longer just a seasonal stop. It became a year-round community, whether people liked it or not. You step outside into the starlit nothingness, your boots finally softened by heat and effort. The snow under your feet is so dry it doesn't pack. It just slips and crunches like sugar under pressure. Every breath hurts, but in a weird way it's refreshing, like your lungs are being rinsed with ice water. The air here feels ancient, untouched. It smells faintly of smoke and pine and something metallic, like the earth itself is exhaling. You make your way toward the edge of the village, where a few older cabins sit half-sunk in snowdrifts, their roofs bowed under the weight. One has collapsed entirely. Another is propped up with logs, held together more by hope than architecture. These are the remnants of the original settlement, shacks and huts built by people who didn't come here by choice. It's eerily quiet. No wind, just the soft hiss of ice shifting under your boots. A plaque nailed to one wall tells you this house belonged to a weather station worker back in the 1940s. One of the men who braved this frost to gather temperature readings with old-school instruments. No satellites. No automated sensors. Just a man, a notebook, and mercury thermometers that sometimes shattered mid-reading. That's how the coldest temperatures on Earth were once recorded, by guys standing in negative 90 degrees Fahrenheit cold, scribbling notes while their eyebrows froze into white bristles. Here's your historical tidbit. During the height of the Gulag system, tens of thousands of prisoners were sent to work in areas like Yakutia. Many didn't survive, but those who did sometimes stayed, married locals, raised children, and became part of this frozen legacy. So while Oymyakon may seem like a village built by choice, its roots are tangled in barbed wire and exile. As for your quirky fact, this one's strange. Some old-timers in the area claim they can smell when the temperature drops below minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They describe it as a dry metallic bite to the nose, like the air itself is warning you. Scientists shrug at this and say there's no data to back it up, but anyone who's lived here long enough swears it's real. Just one of those weird superpowers cold gifts you when it doesn't kill you first. And that brings us to one of the few things still debated in scholarly circles: why people voluntarily stayed once the Soviet pressure disappeared. After the USSR collapsed, many Siberian towns emptied out. Life got harder, supplies grew scarce, but Oymyakon, it held on. Some left, sure, but a surprising number didn't. Why? Some say it's pride. Surviving where few can is a badge of honor. Others blame stubbornness, or the fact that starting over somewhere else costs more than staying put. But many locals point to something less tangible, a connection to the land that defies reason. A deep-rooted sense that this place, cold and cruel as it is, belongs to them, and they to it. You pass a young girl playing in the snow. Her cheeks are red, her breath forming little puffs as she sings to herself in a language you don't understand. She's not wearing gloves. Her coat is handmade. She gives you a sideways glance, curious but unfazed. To her, this isn't the coldest place on Earth. It's just home. Back at the cabin, you huddle near the stove again, grateful for the groan of firewood and the sharp smell of burning resin. You sip something warm that tastes vaguely of honey and fermented berries. You try not to think about the outhouse. That'll be tomorrow's horror. For now, you're learning that the cold here doesn't just test your body, it tests your story, why you came, what you think you need, who you think you are, and whether you're really the kind of person who can make it through the night. Spoiler alert, you're going to try. The cabin smells like smoke, sweat, and soup, and it's oddly comforting. You've started to recognize the rhythm of life here. Every movement is calculated. Every trip outside is a mission. There's no such thing as just stepping out for something. You gear up like you're launching into space, and when you come back, your face feels like it's been sandblasted with ice. So yeah, even just using the bathroom requires emotional preparation. This morning, if you can call it that, since the sun is still nowhere in sight, you're getting a lesson in cold survival basics. Not from a military guidebook or a Discovery Channel documentary, but from a grandmother in 3 layers of wool and a stare that could freeze water faster than the weather. She doesn't say much, just gestures. You follow. First, the coat. Not a modern down jacket or anything you'd find in a catalogue. It's reindeer hide stitched by hand with the fur turned inward. She pulls one off a peg on the wall and holds it out. It's stiff, heavy, and smells faintly of animal. You slip it on and instantly feel a difference, like someone wrapped you in a furnace. The fibres don't just insulate, they trap your body heat and won't let it go. Next come the boots, called unti. They're made of reindeer leg skin and lined with hay. Not fashion forward, but your toes are already sending thank you notes. Then mittens, thick shapeless blobs that make your hands useless for anything other than not dying. You ask about gloves. She grunts and waves a mitten at you like you just suggested juggling knives. Now it's time to talk heat. A fire is your god here. You must tend it, feed it, never trust it to keep going on its own. Your host shows you the stash of firewood, carefully dried pine and birch logs stacked like a precious resource. Because they are. Every log was chopped, hauled and dried over months. Wet wood, worthless. Frozen wood, worse. You don't just burn anything. It has to be the right wood, the right size, and placed just right in the stove. Screw it up and you either freeze or smoke yourself out. There's no central heating in Oymyakon, no radiant floors or digital thermostats. It's just this, iron stoves and muscle memory. You learn to keep the fire at a steady roar, to bank the coals for the long night, and to set a backup log near the edge ready to push in before dawn. It's primitive, it's perfect. Water, of course, is its own ordeal. The village's well is a hole in the frozen river, carefully maintained, covered with thick logs, and watched over like a holy site. You walk there with metal buckets and a pickaxe. The locals take turns chipping through the crust of ice that reforms daily, like a scab on the world. The water beneath is pure, painfully cold, and your reward for 15 minutes of effort in sub-zero darkness. Back in the cabin, there's an old iron kettle always simmering. Always. It's like the house's heartbeat. It provides hot drinks, soup base, and warmth for thawing, frozen hands. You start to realise that nothing here is casual. Every comfort is earned. Every luxury, like a second helping of broth, is the result of 100 tiny victories over the cold. Now for your historical dose. During World War II, many Siberian villages became critical supply points for moving equipment and soldiers across the USSR. Even isolated places like Oymyakon found themselves tied to the war effort. Some say the extreme cold toughened people so thoroughly that when they were sent west to fight, the winter felt like nothing. And here's your quirky fact of the day. In Oymyakon, they don't bury the dead in winter. They can't. The ground is frozen solid, down to depths of 6 feet or more. So when someone passes away during the coldest months, the body is stored in a makeshift ice vault or shed until the spring thaw. It's practical, a little creepy, and very, very Siberian. But there's a debate that floats around this place, and it usually surfaces around a fire when people have had a bit of vodka. The question is this the best way to survive the cold? Modern gear is available, synthetic fabrics, portable heaters, but the elders scoff. They say their coats, their tools, their routines, they work because they were made for this. Handmade fur boots don't freeze like synthetic soles. A fire doesn't break down like a battery-powered blanket. There's tension between tradition and modernity here. Some young people wear snowmobile suits and use fuel-based heaters in their trucks. Others stick to what their grandparents taught them, and when winter gets mean, and it always does, it's usually the old ways that still work. You step outside again, this time dressed like a tundra warrior, and it feels different. Not exactly warm, but not like you're about to die, which is progress. The snow squeaks under your boots, a sound so dry and crisp it's like stepping on styrofoam. Your breath still fogs your scarf, but it doesn't freeze through as fast. You walk past a neighbour chopping wood, the axe blade glinting under a hanging light bulb powered by the village generator. He waves. His moustache is white with frost, but his eyes are bright. He's not just surviving, he's living. You nod back, trying to look less like a slightly frozen idiot. And then, as if on cue, a local kid zips past on a sled pulled by a mangy-looking dog with fur so thick it's practically armour. The dog gives you a side-eye. The kid laughs and shouts something that sounds suspiciously like slowpoke in Russian. You'll allow it. Inside again, the fire crackles, your fingers tingle, and the soup bubbles with the comforting smell of something salty and fatty. You finally understand survival isn't about brute strength here. It's about rhythm, habit, layered wool and simple tools, and a deep respect for coal that never blinks. Somewhere in the dead of night, if you can even call it that when the sun hasn't made an appearance in days, the air outside takes a strange, sharper edge. You feel it before you know it. The walls of the cabin creak like they're bracing for something. The stove, despite being fed just an hour ago, suddenly doesn't feel like it's keeping up. The chill that seeps in is quieter, hungrier. This is no ordinary cold. Your host notices it too. He says a single word, low and almost respectful, moroz. Not just cold. This word carries a heavier meaning here. Deep freeze, the big frost, that creeping monster of a temperature drop that comes a few times each winter and resets everything. People say it feels like the atmosphere folds in on itself. Time doesn't pass. It pauses. And you're about to experience what locals call the night the thermometer broke. At some point during this infamous cold snap, depending on who's telling the story, it got so cold the official outdoor thermometer cracked. Not like it shattered into pieces or exploded dramatically. No, it just stopped registering. The mercury inside, or sometimes alcohol, used because it freezes at a lower point, had reached the end of its measurable line. The glass cylinder, brittle from exposure, developed a crack down the side. Useless. And that's when people realised the thermometer hadn't broken. The air had. There's something unnerving about a temperature so low it escapes instruments. Weather station logs from the 1930s record a night in Oymyakon when the reading dropped below -71 degrees Celsius or -96 degrees Fahrenheit. Some argue it dipped even lower, possibly down to -72 or -73 degrees Celsius, but the equipment simply couldn't keep up. The data was handwritten, passed along through cables slower than a glacier, and buried in Soviet bureaucracy. But one thing's for sure, it was the coldest officially recorded night in any inhabited part of the world. You step outside that night because you have to, let's be honest, and the moment the door opens, your nose hairs freeze together. Literally. It feels like your sinuses just got electrocuted. The scarf over your mouth stiffens within seconds. Any exposed skin screams, then goes quiet. That's the warning sign. The pain is good. It's the silence that follows, the numbness, that means trouble. Even the snow sounds different. It doesn't crunch. It squeaks. Every step sounds like you're twisting styrofoam under your boots. Your shadow is long and strange under the flicker of a single overhead light bulb. Even the light seems frozen, hanging heavier than usual in the frigid air. You walk with purpose, straight to the central square where the broken thermometer stands. It's mounted on a post, like a statue, except tonight there's a crowd gathering around it. Everyone bundled up like colourful marshmallows, cheeks red and eyes squinting. No one speaks much, just a lot of stamping feet, nods, a few muttered updates. It's a communal ritual. When the mercury falls past a certain point, the town becomes a little family, huddled, half-frozen, stubborn as hell. Someone taps the glass. A crack runs along the inner casing. It's happened again. One old man pulls a small analogue backup from his pocket, a kind used in science experiments or, frankly, survival movies. He shakes it out, squints, and announces something in Russian. You don't catch the words, but the silence that follows is loud. And that's when it hits you. You're standing in the coldest place on the coldest night in human recorded history, and you still have toes, for now. Now for a wild little fact. At these temperatures, metal doesn't just become cold, it behaves like a different material entirely. If you touched a metal pole with bare skin right now, it would fuse instantly. Your skin would stick, tear, bleed, and freeze all in under 5 seconds. People have lost fingers to a doorknob, a zipper, the metal rim of a tea mug. You start glancing around, suddenly aware of just how much metal surrounds you. In response to this threat, locals have cold-proofed their lives in bizarre ways. For example, lighters are carried inside the coat, against the skin, because otherwise they simply won't spark. Car keys? Same thing. And if you must interact with the door handle, you do it with a folded piece of felt or the padded side of a mitten. Everyone has a story of the one time they forgot. Everyone. Here's your historical angle. The thermometers used in Oymyakon were originally designed for industrial cold storage testing. Think meat lockers and rail transport. But even those weren't made for -70s. Soviet engineers eventually modified a few specifically for the region's meteorological stations. Still, they failed. The cold snapped not only glass, but expectations. And here's your quirky fact of the night. During these super cold spells, locals say you can hear trees explode. Seriously, it's called frost cracking. The sap and moisture inside trunks freeze and expand so violently that the wood bursts with a sharp pop like a rifle shot. You'll be walking through the woods thinking you're alone, and suddenly, crack, you drop to the snow thinking someone's hunting bears. Nope, just a birch tree screaming. There's a local debate, quiet, unspoken, but ever present, about what actually counts as coldest. Some argue for a single night temperature record. Others point to sustained lows across weeks. And then there are the rogue scientists and enthusiasts who claim unmonitored valleys in Antarctica or Greenland might secretly hold colder temps. But no one lives in those places. Here, there are dogs, kids, stores, taxis. It's the coldest inhabited place, and that's a very different kind of bragging right. Back inside, you thaw slowly. It's not like flipping a switch. Your skin tingles, prickles, then itches like it's being chewed on by invisible insects. That's circulation returning. Good sign. Also deeply unpleasant. You wrap yourself in a quilt so thick it might have once been a yurt and sip tea made from melted river ice and something vaguely herbal. Outside, the temperature has bottomed out. The stars hang over the village like cold lanterns. The fire crackles, and someone across the room mutters something in Russian you don't catch, but you feel it. A sigh of respect, maybe fear, maybe awe. You survived the night the thermometer broke. Not bad for a tourist. By now your body has learned a new language. It speaks in layers: wool, hide, cotton, fur. Your face knows the instinctive twitch of warning when the air gets just a little too quiet. Your fingertips flinch near anything metal. And your breath. It's no longer invisible. It ghosts out in clouds that feel like part of your personality now, always floating just ahead, as if scouting the path for danger. Tonight, you're stepping outside not just to feel the cold, but to see what it does. Because there's theory, and then there's reality. And reality in Oymyakon at -95 degrees Fahrenheit is a strange, frozen carnival of physics gone feral. First up, spit. Sounds gross, but here it's basically a scientific experiment. The classic spit test is simple. You lean over, give a quick spit onto the ground, and watch. In warmer places, it might just pool or vanish. Here, it clicks, literally. Your spit hits the ground as a solid, not a puddle, not a drizzle, a tiny glass-like pellet that bounces once and rolls away. You stare at it. It stares back. Then you try something locals call the boiling water trick. With a little metal pot, you boil a bit of river water on the stove until it's steaming furiously. Then, with the gleeful look of a 5-year-old about to break something, your host throws the contents into the air. For a second, it looks like chaos. Droplets, steam, motion, and then, poof. The water vanishes. It transforms mid-air into a powdery white cloud of snow and mist. Nothing hits the ground. It doesn't have time. The atmosphere just rips the heat out of it, molecule by molecule, before gravity even remembers to act. You've seen this in videos, sure, but in person, it feels like magic, or a warning. Then there's metal. The door to the storage shed has a metal latch, and your host, clearly amused by your wide-eyed fascination with the air's hostility, tells you to give it a try, without gloves. You hesitate. He shrugs. You tap it lightly with one knuckle, and nope. Immediate regret. It clings to your skin like it's in love with pain. You pull back fast and hear the tiniest rip, like peeling tape off your arm. Your knuckle stings. Lesson learned. Here's your main historical fact for this chapter of Frost. During the 1930s, Soviet researchers stationed in Yakutia began compiling detailed notes on what extreme cold does not just to humans, but to infrastructure. They observed how different metals responded to long exposure, how steel would become brittle and crack like porcelain, how rubber lost flexibility completely, how train rails could shear under weight from simple stress points. It was pioneering research, grim and brilliant. Meanwhile, today you get to learn some of those lessons firsthand by watching the family truck try and fail to start. This happens often here. Even though it was left running earlier, someone forgot to refuel it while it was hot. Big mistake. Now, the diesel fuel is jelly. The battery is a block of apathy. The engine groans once, coughs like a lifelong smoker, then dies with a whimper. The solution? Fire. Not metaphorically. You actually have to heat the engine. In this case, your host rolls out a small metal drum and lights a fire under the truck. Yes, you read that right. A literal fire beneath the frozen oil pan is not as dangerous as it sounds, mostly. They've done it for years. The heat slowly seeps upward, thawing the machinery until it reluctantly agrees to function again. If it doesn't explode, it works like a charm. And here's your fringe, quirky fact. In Yakutia, some people refuse to wear glasses in deep cold. Not because they fog up, that's a common issue, but because the metal frames can freeze to your face. More than one poor soul has tried to remove their specs too fast and left a patch of eyebrow skin behind. The safe bet? Either wear plastic frames or go full mole person and squint your way through the world. Tonight, people are gathering in one of the larger homes, a small community hall that doubles as a social hub. Why? Because it's too cold to be alone. Even the most introverted resident knows that community warmth isn't just emotional, it's literal. More bodies means more heat, and in a log cabin with a central wood stove, every person adds a few degrees. You arrive to find the room filled with foggy laughter and the smell of meat dumplings, pelmeni, boiling on the stove. Kids are bundled to their eyebrows playing cards. Someone's strumming an old guitar that's gone slightly out of tune from the cold, but no one minds. You sit on a bench near the stove, hands outstretched. Your fingertips are numb, then itchy, then painfully hot as the blood fights its way back. There's a quiet, respectful conversation in the corner. People talking about last year's cold snap. How the old power station failed. How they had to sleep 3 families to a room for 2 weeks, taking turns feeding the stove every 2 hours. They laugh about it now, but you can tell it wasn't a joke at the time. Survival was never guaranteed. And here's your open scholarly debate for the night. Scientists still argue about the exact impact of extreme cold on human cognition. Some studies suggest our brains slow down in sub-zero temps, that memory and reaction time are dulled. But others say the opposite, that the sharp bite of cold actually improves focus, hones awareness. Locals here swear they think more clearly in winter, that their minds are sharpest when the air tries to kill them. Who's right? Hard to say. Maybe it depends on whether you've ever had to light a fire under a frozen truck at 4 a.m. Back outside, the cold seems deeper than before, like it's aware of you now. The stars hang heavy and distant, too bright, almost fake-looking. The trees don't move, not a twig. The whole world is paused, suspended. You exhale, and the mist floats upward, then sideways, then vanishes into the darkness. You tuck your hands into your coat and think, this is what it means to be alive in the coldest corner of the earth. Everything is slower, harder, but sharper too, more real, and so, once again, you survive another walk through a world not meant for people, one frozen step at a time. By now, you've become half frosted and half indoctrinated. You no longer question things like why it takes 10 minutes to put on socks, or why every doorway has 5 layers of cloth hanging over it like a medieval gauntlet. You've stopped checking your phone. It's been dead for days. You think you might smell like firewood and unwashed wool. You accept this. You have bigger things to worry about, like what happens when the only people tracking the temperature can't leave their post without risking their lives. Today you're going to meet the local meteorologists. Sounds cozy, right? Maybe in some parts of the world, but here, being a weather observer is basically being a glorified ice hermit with a PhD in not dying. The weather station sits on the edge of the village, a squat building wrapped in sheet metal and snowdrifts, with an ancient-looking antenna and a half-buried wooden fence. Getting there means walking across open land, where the wind hasn't forgotten how to scream. Your host leads you with the kind of pace that suggests urgency, but not panic. One foot in front of the other. Don't stop. Don't adjust your scarf. Don't think about how your breath just froze into little crystals on your collarbone. This kind of cold turns flesh to freezer burn in minutes. That's not exaggeration. That's documented. Touch your cheek, and it goes numb. Leave it exposed, and it goes black. You finally reach the station. The door is almost iced shut, and it takes both of you to force it open. Inside, it's dim, warm, and filled with the scent of coffee, kerosene, and mouldy paperwork. A man looks up from behind a desk covered in charts and analog instruments, each one looking like it survived 5 apocalypses. He nods once and waves you in. This is Igor. His name might not actually be Igor. but that's what you decide to call him, because somehow it fits. He wears a hat even indoors, has 3 thermometers strapped to his belt, and seems like he hasn't blinked since 1998. He pours you a cup of coffee that tastes like burnt shoe leather and gestures toward the window. Out there, on a metal stand, is the station's pride and frustration, the primary temperature gauge. A hybrid of digital and analog tech, modified over the years to handle readings no other system on Earth has to deal with. It's mounted in a wooden Stevenson screen, a kind of ventilated box that keeps direct sunlight off the instruments. Not that sunshine is a problem right now. It hasn't shown its face in 2 weeks. Igor explains through a mix of Russian and dramatic hand gestures that the real danger isn't just the cold, it's inaccuracy. When temperatures reach record lows, sensors stop being trustworthy. Metal contracts, batteries give out, even the air density starts interfering with signal transmission. You think weather forecasting is a pain in your city? Try doing it when your instruments ice over from the inside. He leads you outside briefly, barely a minute, but even that's enough to make your fingertips scream under your gloves. You approach the recording instruments. They look deceptively simple. A thermometer, a pressure gauge, a small anemometer spinning slowly in the breeze. Everything is insulated, double-wrapped, sealed tighter than your coat. Then comes the ritual, the analog check. Twice a day, someone, usually Igor or one of his equally frostbitten co-workers, goes out and writes the temperature down by hand. Not because they don't trust the computers, but because they can't. They've learned not to. The tech can lie, the notebook doesn't. Here's your historical fact for today. Soviet meteorological stations in the 20th century were manned year-round, regardless of temperature. During the Cold War, data from places like Oymyakon was considered strategic. Knowing how the cold moved, how it killed, and how it bent the laws of materials, this wasn't just weather trivia, it was military intelligence. And somewhere in a dusty archive in Moscow, there are probably still files stamped classified with pages full of temperature graphs and frostbite diagrams. And now, your quirky fact. In the 1960s, one meteorologist here insisted that foxes could sense cold fronts hours in advance. He kept a pet fox near the station and swore that whenever it began scratching obsessively at the walls, a deep freeze was coming. Scientists laughed until, over the course of 3 years, his fox was right 83% of the time. Unfortunately, the fox bit a visiting official and had to be relocated. Still, the locals remember. They say animals know things people don't. But the real debate among meteorologists, and you can tell it weighs on Igor more than he wants to admit, is this. What if we missed the real coldest night? What if, in some unmonitored corner of the valley, with no instruments, no humans, no witnesses, the temperature dropped lower than anything ever recorded? What if it already happened, and no one ever knew? It's the ghost of weather, an unprovable record. The idea haunts these researchers more than the frostbite. Some even argue it's likely that on some cloudless, windless, perfect night in some ravine, only known to elk and reindeer, the Earth exhaled a chill even colder than minus 71.2 degrees Celsius. But we can't prove it. We weren't there. The instruments failed. Again. Back inside the station, Igor scribbles today's reading on the wall calendar. The number doesn't shock anyone anymore. It's just another day in the minus 60s. The coffee is reheated, the kerosene lamp flickers, and someone starts playing a cassette tape of old Soviet pop songs in the background, like a weird lullaby from another time. You glance at the walls, covered in maps, data charts, and doodles. One shows a cartoon snowflake holding a sign that reads, "We're still colder than your ex." The humour helps. Barely. You step outside again to leave, and for the first time, you swear the wind sounds like a whisper. Not quite a voice, but close. Maybe it's just your scarf rustling. Maybe it's something else. The cold has a personality here, a rhythm, a set of eyes maybe. You trudge back through the snow, boots heavy, air biting. You've been shown the cold's nerve centre, where the numbers are born, and for a place that's supposedly emotionless, just data and degrees, it somehow feels more personal than ever, as if the cold itself wants to be remembered. Well, it is. At some point, even your bones feel tired. Not just from the cold, though that plays its part, but from the sheer weight of existence in a place that requires you to earn every moment. This morning the stove needed feeding again at 3 a.m. The fire had died just enough for the chill to creep in under the doorframe, and start frosting the edge of your pillow. You didn't scream or panic. You just rolled out of bed like a grumbling seal, jammed your hands into your mittens and tossed 2 logs into the iron belly of the stove like it owed you money. You're adapting, or going numb. At this point, there's barely a difference. But as the day crawls forward, something goes wrong. It starts small. A strange metallic knock from the corner of the cabin, then a loud crack, like someone fired a rifle in the kitchen. You sit up straight, heart thudding, only to see a thin trickle of water inching across the floor. But it's not water for long. It freezes in front of your eyes, forming a thin glassy sheet just under the edge of the table. The pipes have burst. Your host appears in the doorway with a face that says, "Ah, here we go again. No panic, just quiet annoyance." You follow him outside, where a spider web of plastic and metal piping is hidden beneath a makeshift layer of insulation. Blankets, burlap sacks, straw, and a generous dose of wishful thinking. Somewhere along the line, a section snapped, probably at a weak joint. The ice inside expanded and split the pipe like it was made of sugar. That's what happens when even your plumbing starts shivering. In most places, this would be a disaster. Here, it's Tuesday. Water has always been one of the biggest threats in Oymyakon. Not because there's not enough of it, but because keeping it liquid is a daily war. Pipe systems don't work well in permafrost. The ground is permanently frozen, down to hundreds of meters. That means no burying pipes for insulation, no fancy underground water mains, and definitely no emergency repair crews coming out in trucks with flashing lights. If your water system breaks, you fix it, or you go back to the old ways, and the old ways are already kicking in. Step 1. Find snow. Not just any snow either. The dry windswept powder that covers most of the village is too light, too airy. You need compact snow, dense stuff, preferably from a drift that's been sitting a while. It contains less air, more moisture. You shovel it into metal buckets, which clink and rattle like you're scooping gravel. Each bucket takes 15, maybe 20 minutes to collect if you want good quality. Then back to the stove. You melt the snow in batches. The first melt always smells a little strange. Smoky, maybe even a hint of pine, depending on where you collected it. The water turns grey. You filter it through cloth. Heat it again. Boil it. And then finally you have a few usable litres. Congratulations. You now have enough for a pot of tea and a toothbrush rinse. Only 15 more buckets to go if you want a bath. Here's a fun historical truth to add some flavour. Until the late 1980s, many Siberian homes didn't even try to have running water during winter. Instead, water was collected in ledyanaya, or ice cellars, blocks of ice carved from rivers and stored in shaded sheds. When water was needed, a piece was chopped off and melted inside. Ice was currency. Families would haul blocks home on sleds, treating them like winter gold. Some villages still do this, though now the sleds might be pulled by snowmobiles instead of horses or dogs. And now for your offbeat fact of the day, the phrase, "when the pipes cried," isn't just a poetic turn of phrase in Yakutia, it's practically a proverb. People say it with a mix of dread and humour. When the pipes cry, it means they've split and frozen, and the real work begins. There's a kind of reverence for these moments, as if the infrastructure is alive and occasionally throws tantrums just to remind you who's boss. As you help pour boiling water onto the icy pipe fragments in an attempt to locate the exact break, you start to understand something new about life here. There's no expectation of permanence. Nothing is built to last forever. Everything, pipes, homes, roads, fingers, has an expiration date in the cold. You build with that in mind. Repairs are constant. Workarounds are creative. The goal isn't perfection, it's function. Eventually the leak is isolated. A new section of pipe is cut, fitted and sealed with a rubber sleeve and wire. Not pretty, not by any official code, but it holds. You all give a collective nod of approval that feels suspiciously like pride. Water begins to trickle through the system again, and just in time, someone wants tea. But the bigger takeaway from the day isn't the repair. It's the reveal of just how quickly people can shift modes out here. One moment you're sipping soup, the next you're ankle deep in icy slush, cursing at plastic joints, and laughing while your eyelashes freeze into small white daggers. And no one calls it an emergency. It's just the rhythm. The debate this evening over cups of hot broth and half-frozen bread centres on whether any kind of modern insulation system could actually prevent pipe failure long-term. Some say yes. Foam-injected polyurethane tubes, underground heating coils, even solar-assisted warming systems, but others shake their heads. Out here, once the mercury dips below a certain threshold, all bets are off. No material wants to stay flexible, no seal wants to hold. Sooner or later, the cold wins. You crawl into bed that night with fingers that smell like melted plastic and pine smoke. Your face is flushed from wind and effort. The fire is strong, the stove ticking softly, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, the repaired pipe creaks like it's sighing. You survived a burst pipe in the coldest town on Earth, and somehow that feels like more of an accomplishment than it should. By now, you've made peace with the fact that anything mechanical in Oymyakon is held together with wire, prayer, and the kind of stubbornness that bends reality. If it moves, it breaks. If it runs, it freezes. And if it doesn't freeze, well, give it time. This morning, your host introduces you to the local approach to transportation during the coldest months. Or rather, the constant low-stakes battle between human ingenuity and a climate that would happily destroy every vehicle on Earth just for fun. You're standing outside the barn staring at a vehicle that looks like a Soviet tank and a toaster had an angry baby. It's a UAZ van, the same one you saw earlier idling in the cold like a nervous dog. Its engine is already running, puffing white clouds into the air like a tired dragon. You ask why it's been running since yesterday. Your host gives a slow, weary blink. Because if it stops, it dies, he says. Not metaphorically, quite literally. Out here, engines are never truly off during winter. If someone's lucky enough to have a garage, and by garage you mean a shed built of tin and hope, they might be able to park inside and let the engine cool overnight. But for everyone else, you either keep the vehicle running or you prepare to perform a full resurrection the next morning. And that resurrection is no joke. If your diesel engine freezes, you can't just jump-start it. First, you heat the oil pan. That might mean lighting a fire beneath it. Yes, an actual fire. Or using an old Soviet-era space heater rigged with duct tape and chewing gum. If you're fancy, you might have a podogravator, a preheating unit built into the engine, connected to an external power source, assuming you've got electricity, which you often don't. Today, you're heading into the nearby woods to check on firewood stores. Not in a car, of course. That'd be too easy. You're travelling by snowmobile, though the locals just call it a buren, the brand name of the beast that's carried them through the worst winters. It looks like it's been through a war. Rusted handlebars, duct-taped seams, and a cracked windshield held in place with a rope. It's beautiful. You climb on behind your host. He gives the starter cord a yank. Nothing. Another yank. Still nothing. A third, this time with a muttered curse, and it sputters to life, coughing black smoke like it's clearing its throat after a 40-year nap. You begin to move. The ride is chaos. The snow isn't soft here, it's dry, crystalline, and packed in hard drifts that launch the snowmobile into the air every few yards. Your teeth rattle, your knees scream, your face. One large frozen question mark. But the view is stunning. Pines heavy with frost, their branches sagging like they're exhausted. A pale blue sky slowly fading into the pinkish grey of near-perpetual twilight. You pass a group of shaggy dogs racing through the trees, tails wagging, noses crusted with ice. They glance at the snowmobile and seem unimpressed. Eventually you reach the woods. There, between two trees, is a sled stacked with firewood and covered with a frozen tarp. Your host hops off, stomps his boots, and starts checking the load. He does this every week. It's easier to store the wood near the trees where it was chopped and bring it back in batches. Less to haul, less to burn. Every log is precious. And here comes your historical bite. During the Soviet expansion into Siberia, the winter transportation system relied heavily on reindeer sleds and dog teams. In fact, long before engines ever showed up, Evenki herders had mapped vast distances using nothing but sleighs, stars, and snow-hardened instincts. For centuries, they traversed frozen rivers, scaled icy ridges, and even crossed into what is now Alaska. They didn't just survive the cold, they mastered its highways. In many rural places like Oymyakon, those skills are still alive. Sure, there are trucks and snowmobiles now, but if the fuel runs out or the machine dies, which it will, reindeer still work. Some households keep them not just for meat or tradition, but as plan B when diesel freezes. Here's a deliciously weird fact. Diesel fuel here is often mixed with additives that technically make it illegal by global environmental standards. Locals call it polar diesel. a Frankenstein blend that resists freezing at minus 60 degrees Celsius and smells like it could kill a bear. It's toxic, thick, and absolutely necessary. You can't save the planet if your engine won't start. Morality tends to bend when your life depends on combustion, and the open debate of the day whether electric vehicles could ever function here. Spoiler, most locals say no. The battery range shrinks to near uselessness in extreme cold. Lithium cells hate low temps. Charging stations are non-existent. But some engineers argue that with new battery chemistries and insulated heating systems, EVs might someday roll across the permafrost. For now, though, that's science fiction. The only electric vehicle that works in Oymyakon is a sled with a particularly stubborn dog named Battery. After resecuring the wood load, your host gestures for you to grab the rope and help pull. It's not a short walk back. The snowmobile can't carry the sled with 2 people aboard, and you, lucky you, get to learn what a mile-long firewood haul feels like in minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill. It's humbling. By the time you return to the village, your breath has frozen into your scarf so thoroughly you have to peel it away slowly, like pulling off a wax strip. Your mittens are soaked through. Your boots feel like wet anvils. But there's also a strange buzz in your chest. You helped bring the heat back home. Literally. There's no metaphor here, just logs, sweat, and the satisfying groan of the stove flaring back to life when you toss in the first chunk. The snowmobile coughs once more before being shut off, and you all glance at it like it might explode. It doesn't. Just settles into silence, a sleeping beast. You pat it once on the side, grateful. Then you stomp the snow off your boots, head back inside, and sit by the fire like you've earned it, which you have. Transportation in the coldest place on Earth isn't about comfort. It's about odds, calculating them, betting against them, and if you're lucky, rolling into the driveway before the engine freezes solid again. The wind picks up tonight, a slow but steady roar that works its way through every crack in the cabin walls. It doesn't howl, not yet, but it moans with purpose, the way old doors creak when they're tired of being opened. You sit by the fire, back aching, legs sore from hauling firewood through ice that has no give. Your host pours you a cup of something hot and milky, thick enough to pass for soup, though it tastes faintly of goat. You drink it anyway. You've learned not to ask. Then comes the knock at the door. 3 short raps. Your host doesn't look surprised. He just stands, adjusts his coat, and gestures for you to follow. It's not danger. It's something else. Something urgent, but normal in the weird rhythm of this place. Outside, the cold hits like a wall again, though it's not quite as cruel tonight. Just firm, like it's reminding you who's in charge. Standing at the doorstep is a young man with wide eyes and an old parka. His breath escapes in frantic puffs, his words coming fast in Yakut and Russian. You don't understand a thing, but the tone is unmistakable. Something's wrong. Something about reindeer. 10 minutes later, you're packed into the still warm UAZ van with 3 other villagers, bouncing over the frozen trail toward the outer edge of the valley. The headlights barely pierce the swirling ice fog, and every time you hit a snowdrift, the van rattles like it's trying to shake its soul loose. The road, if it can be called that, is a single set of frozen tyre tracks lined with stunted birch trees and snow-covered shrubs. The air smells like diesel and panic. Eventually the van stops. Everyone piles out. Ahead, in a clearing lit only by a weak moon and the reflection of high beams, is a small herd of reindeer. You can see them even in the dark, huddled close together, their breath rising in clouds, eyes wide and shimmering with nervous energy. The problem is instantly clear. The fence is down. A section of the wooden enclosure has collapsed under a drift of snow and ice, and a few of the animals are outside the boundary. Worse, wolves have been spotted nearby. Reindeer don't survive alone for long out here, not without the protection of the herd or the people who care for them. And so, without hesitation, the villagers go to work. Your job? Stand back and hold a flashlight. You don't argue, you just watch. One man, the eldest of the group, whistles softly as he approaches the panicked animals. His movements are slow, deliberate, unthreatening. You expect the reindeer to bolt, but they don't. They know him, or maybe they just know his voice. Either way, a small female nudges her way back toward the pen. The others follow in hesitant steps. Meanwhile, 2 others begin lifting the broken section of the fence with gloved hands, muscles straining as the ice fights back. One of them pulls a coil of wire from his coat and begins tying the beams together with the efficiency of someone who's done this 1,000 times. The fence won't be perfect tonight, but it will hold, long enough to keep the wolves out. Hopefully. Here's your historical glimpse. The even people, indigenous to this region, have herded reindeer across these lands for centuries. They are semi-nomadic, following their herds across hundreds of kilometres, using no roads, only instinct, memory and tradition. Soviet collectivization tried to dismantle this way of life, turning herders into workers, reindeer into quotas. But the knowledge never left. It just went underground, hidden in stories and the quiet hum of evening chores. Now, in places like Oymyakon, it's returned, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. And the reindeer, they're not just livestock, they're partners. Their meat is food, their bones are tools, their hides are warmth, and when engines fail, as they often do, they pull sleds through snow that would swallow a snowmobile whole. They are the backup system when everything else gives up. Here's your fringe fact. Some reindeer in Siberia are trained to respond to specific musical notes. Herders have been known to carry small flutes carved from bone, using high-pitched tones to direct the animals across frozen expanses. To outsiders, it sounds like bird calls. To the herd, it's language. By now, the fence is up, the herd recontained. A few of the men stamp down the snow around the perimeter, making it harder for drifts to build up overnight. Someone tosses a few handfuls of moss, lichen, really, into the pen, calming the animals further. You stand quietly, the flashlight dimming, watching the reindeer settle. But this moment has weight. You feel it in your chest. If this had happened on a colder night, or if the wolves had been closer, or if the men hadn't reacted as fast, this could have ended differently. And that's always the background hum here. Cold doesn't kill dramatically. It just waits for you to miss something. A crack in a pipe, a dying engine, a fallen fence. Back in the van, the mood is light again. Someone jokes that the reindeer are just testing their boundaries. Another mutters that the wolves must be full tonight. Everyone laughs. Not because it's funny, but because it's over. For now. The van bumps back toward the village, its shocks protesting every hole and ridge. The moon hangs heavy behind a veil of clouds. The stars are shy tonight. Or maybe just frozen in place like everything else. The scholarly debate of the night is one that spans both anthropology and ecology. Will reindeer herding survive the 21st century? With climate change threatening traditional migration routes and modern jobs luring young people away from the herding life, many believe the practice is fading. Others argue it will adapt, as it always has, shifting into hybrid systems of satellite-tracked herds and digital monitoring. But in places like this, it's not just a way of life. It's the only one that works. You step out of the van and into the cold again. The cabin's window glows in the distance. You don't even flinch now as the frost curls around your face. You've spent the night helping save a herd of animals that, in their own quiet way, help save this place. Inside, you strip off your boots, peel the ice from your scarf and slump down by the stove. The fire pops gently. You think you hear a reindeer grunt in the distance. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe not. Either way, the fence is up, the wolves are far enough, and the night is one small victory colder than it was before. You don't dream much out here, not because you're not sleeping. When the stove's going strong and your toes are still attached, you sleep like the dead. But your dreams are muted, quiet, like they're saving energy. Even your subconscious knows the cold doesn't take kindly to nonsense. Still, this morning you wake with something lingering, a vague memory of firelight and shadows on rock. You can't quite place it. Maybe it's the reindeer, maybe it's the cold seeping too far in. But as you sit up and watch the light creeping around the frost-laced curtains, you feel like you've woken inside something ancient. Today you're going backward. Way backward. Your host tells you about a place not far from the village. Well, not far by local standards, which means an hour on a snowmobile and a half-day hike. But a place worth visiting if you want to understand just how long people have been wrestling with the cold. He calls it the cave, though that's not its name. It doesn't really have one. It's just part of the hillside, part of the landscape, a quiet scar on the face of a frozen mountain. You pack light, just water, dry meat, a headlamp, and the feeling that you might be walking into a museum no one knows about. The wind is still, which is rare. The air feels heavy, dense, like it's waiting for you to make a move. You ride the snowmobile as far as it'll take you, then walk. The snow is knee-deep, powdery but cold enough to make every step a decision. Your breath feels sharp, your limbs ache. The tree's thin, the land tilts upward, and eventually you find it. A crack in the rock, just wide enough to crawl through. It's surrounded by ancient pine and frost-covered stone, like it's been hiding there for 1,000 winters, which, fun fact, it has. Inside it's dark and dry, and strangely warm. The cave is shallow at first, then curves sharply downward, revealing a chamber carved not just by nature, but by time and fire. Your headlamp catches black smudges on the walls, ancient soot, char marks. Someone was here once, or a lot of someones. There's a ring of stones in the centre of the room, perfectly arranged, long dead embers still clinging to their shape. A fire pit, prehistoric central heating. You run your fingers along the wall and feel something strange. Not carvings, not drawings, but smooth patches, places worn down by hands, generations of hands. People sat here, warmed their bones, chewed frozen meat, and waited out the kind of cold that would make modern Oymyakon seem like a beach trip. Your host joins you, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. He explains that this cave has been used for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found primitive tools here. Bone knives, stone scrapers, the remains of small hearths, reindeer bones, charred fish spines, bits of woven fibre that once might have been a net or a shoe or a bandage. The timeline isn't exact, but they know people used this place to survive during the Ice Age, the real Ice Age. Here's your historical gem. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 years ago, humans lived in what's now Siberia, surviving conditions even harsher than today. Temperatures may have dropped lower than -100 degrees Fahrenheit in exposed areas, but thanks to fire, animal skins and communal shelter, often in caves just like this, people didn't just survive, they thrived. They developed language, tools, hunting strategies. They buried their dead with care, they painted, they remembered. That ancient knowledge? Bits of it have trickled down, woven into the culture of modern Evenki, Yakut and other indigenous groups. It's not taught in classrooms, it lives in fur-stitching techniques, in the way tents are angled against the wind, in which herbs to brew for warmth or healing. The cave isn't just a shelter, it's a time capsule of instincts that still echo today. And now for your fringe fact. In one Ice Age site just west of here, archaeologists found evidence that humans once used mammoth bones to build windbreaks and temporary shelters. Not as trophies, as architecture. Giant ribs forming half domes, spines as structural supports. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. Cave dwellers in mammoth houses. But it happened. When the cold came for them, they built homes from the skeletons of giants. The scholarly debate still swirls around exactly how those ancient people survived long-term exposure. Did they migrate seasonally, as some suggest? Or did they develop advanced clothing techniques that rival modern insulation? Some researchers argue their fire pits were engineered with layered stones to trap heat and release it slowly, primitive radiant heating. Others believe they relied on communal body warmth, packing 10 or more people into a single shelter for shared survival. Either way, one thing is clear. They made it through, without Gore-Tex, without propane, without backup generators humming in the background. Back outside, the cold hits you harder after the cave. It always feels worse after warmth, even if it's only symbolic. You pull your scarf tighter, your mind buzzing not with fear now, but with awe. You stood in the same space as someone who survived a winter 20,000 years ago, using nothing but what they could hunt, carry and build with their bare hands. And somehow, your frozen walk back to the snowmobile feels lighter, like you're borrowing strength from someone long gone, someone who already beat the cold and left a whisper behind. You can do this too. Back at the village, the light is fading again. The stove is hungry. The soup tastes better tonight. The fire dances with a kind of pride. You lie on your cot, bundled in reindeer hides, and close your eyes. But this time, when sleep comes, it doesn't sneak in quietly. You dream of firelight and mammoth bones and stars that hang so low you could almost reach them. You wake up starving. Not peckish, not snacky. Starving. It's the kind of deep, gnawing hunger that feels wired into your ribs, like your body's sending out a desperate SOS. Turns out the cold burns calories like a wildfire. You're doing almost nothing, just walking, hauling wood, breathing, and yet your system's in overdrive, torching every spare calorie just to keep your core above iceberg. Your host notices. He laughs, wordlessly points to your belly, and makes a pantomime of someone collapsing from hunger. Then he gestures toward the kitchen, where something is already bubbling on the stove in a massive cast-iron pot that looks like it predates civilization. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a steaming bowl of meat. No grain, no fruit, not even a hint of vegetable. Just fatty, tender slices of what turns out to be reindeer, swimming in broth so thick you could patch a wall with it. On the side, raw frozen fish sliced paper thin, like sashimi, but with the texture of icy velvet. You chew carefully. The taste is rich, primal, and surprisingly good. Your body thanks you immediately. This is what it wants. Not toast, not granola. It wants fuel. In this kind of cold, the rules of eating shift. Salad? That's comedy. Watermelon? That's a fantasy. You don't survive on rabbit food when your body's actively trying not to freeze to death. What you need is fat, protein, density. Foods that stick to your bones and light tiny fires in your cells. In Oymyakon, food isn't culture, it's survival engineering. Your host tells you today is a good day to visit another neighbour, an older woman who's known for making stroganina, a traditional dish of raw frozen fish served straight from the blade. You bundle up and head across the snow-covered paths, where the snow is so dry it squeaks like styrofoam beneath your boots. The air has that clean, metallic sharpness again. Your nostrils sting. Good. That means they're still working. The woman greets you in a heavy parka with a smile that could melt permafrost. Her house is modest, but warm and filled with the smell of something fermented and earthy. She leads you to a wooden table where a frozen slab of fish, Arctic Cisco, she says, is laid out like a work of art. Using a short, wickedly sharp knife, she begins slicing the fish into thin ribbons, letting them curl and frost on the wooden plate. You're hesitant at first. It's raw, it's ice cold, but you try it, and the texture is unexpected, silky clean, almost sweet. There's no fishiness, no mush, just cold umami, and something that tastes like it grew in glacier water and never saw the sun. She offers salt, just a pinch, but says the real trick is to eat fast. Too long on the plate and the fish thaws, and thawed fish, that's just mush. She brings out another specialty, cubes of raw horse liver, not cooked, not warmed, just sliced thin, like cold jelly. It sounds like something out of a punishment fantasy, but your host pops one in his mouth like it's candy, chews thoughtfully, and gestures for you to do the same. You do, and it's not bad. Your body doesn't flinch. In fact, something deep inside your ancient DNA says, yes, this is the real stuff. This is fuel from the before times. Time for your historical fact. Indigenous people across Siberia, including the Yakut, Chukchi and Evenki, developed high-fat, high-protein diets tailored perfectly to their environment. Caribou, reindeer, fatty fish and organ meats were staples, not luxuries. They preserved food not by refrigeration but by simply leaving it outside. The permafrost was the pantry. Everything was designed to maximize energy and warmth, long before nutrition labels or calorie counts. And for your fringe fact of the day, the human body in extreme cold shifts its metabolism dramatically. Studies show that people living in Arctic conditions develop brown fat deposits, rare in adults, which help generate heat. Some researchers believe certain populations, like the Yakut, may have genetic adaptations that help them tolerate colder temperatures by processing fat more efficiently and producing more heat. Basically, they're wired for the freeze. The scholarly debate today centres on whether high-fat traditional diets in Arctic communities are sustainable in the modern age. Some nutritionists argue these diets are outdated, high in cholesterol, and risky long-term. Others claim modern Western diets have introduced more problems, processed food, diabetes, heart issues, where none existed before. The people of Oymyakon don't care much for the debate. Their bodies are the argument. If you don't eat fat here, you don't last long enough to worry about cholesterol. Back at the cabin, your host prepares lunch while still digesting breakfast. On the menu, indigirka salad, diced raw fish, onions, frozen lightly, mixed with oil, vinegar, and a shocking amount of salt. It's served nearly frozen, with crunchy onions that bite harder than the wind. He jokes that it's Yakut sushi, but it has a history all its own. Created in the Soviet era to showcase local ingredients, the dish became a staple because it worked. It filled bellies, warmed souls, and didn't require electricity to store. You help stir a pot of stew that's been simmering for hours. It contains chunks of fatty meat, bones still in, and bits of mystery you choose not to question. Whatever it is, it smells like strength. You sip the broth and feel it spread warmth through your fingers, up your arms, down your spine. It's a slow-motion furnace, lit with every spoonful. That evening you sit with neighbours who bring jars of pickled garlic and frozen berries that taste like sour sugar. They toast with a local liquor, sharp, clear, brutal. You sip carefully. It goes down like fire and settles like a handshake. Someone sings a song you don't understand, low and rhythmic. Others join in. It's not joyful exactly, but steady, like they're singing just to stay warm. You go to bed with a full stomach, your breath fogging softly against the cold. Outside, the wind starts up again, testing the seams of the house. But inside, you're heavy with calories and contentment. And maybe that's the real trick here. Not just staying warm, but staying full. Because in Oymyakon, hunger is a warning bell, and you've learned to listen. It's early. Not that it matters. Early looks the same as late in this endless twilight, and your internal clock gave up trying to make sense of anything around day 3. But this morning, there's a different energy in the air. Less heavy somehow. You're still freezing, still hungry, still bundled like a human burrito in wool and fur, but the mood is lighter. Your host gestures for you to follow, excitement in his voice you haven't heard before. Apparently you're going frog hunting. Now before you imagine him wading into a swamp with a net, let's clarify. This has nothing to do with food, or at least not immediately. What he's showing you today is something of a local legend, only it's not a legend at all. It's science wrapped in folklore, wrapped in an amphibian popsicle. You walk to a small wooded area near the edge of town where snow lies undisturbed in fluffy mounds, and the trees groan quietly under their icy armour. The path curves downward into a low-lying basin, almost a frozen swamp. Your boots crunch across a surface that was once water, but is now a sheet of frost and buried vegetation. Your host squats down, brushes aside a patch of snow, and begins digging gently. A few minutes later he lifts something small and stiff from the frozen earth. It's a frog, a Siberian wood frog, and it is frozen solid. You blink at it. It doesn't move, doesn't blink, doesn't breathe. It looks dead. It should be dead. But your host grins, cups the little body in his gloved hand, and explains, with no shortage of amusement, that it isn't dead at all. Just waiting. You've just met nature's weirdest little miracle of survival. Here's your historical fact for today. The Siberian wood frog, Rana amurensis, is one of the only amphibians on Earth capable of surviving full-body freezing. Indigenous people in the region have known about it for centuries, often calling the frogs sleepers or stone frogs during winter months. They appear dead, motionless, unblinking, and as hard as ice cubes. But when spring comes and the thaw begins, they wake up. Their hearts start beating, their lungs begin working, and they hop off like nothing happened. It's not magic, it's biochemistry. These frogs have evolved a natural antifreeze. Glucose floods their bloodstream in freezing temperatures, protecting their cells from rupture. Ice forms between cells but not inside them, allowing vital organs to go into suspended animation without dying. It's the amphibian version of hitting pause on a movie, then picking up exactly where you left off 4 months later. And here's your offbeat, mind-bending fact. Cryobiologists, the scientists who study freezing living tissue, have spent years examining these frogs for clues on how to preserve human organs. The dream? Long-term preservation of hearts, kidneys, even entire bodies for future transplants. There are even people who believe these frogs might be the key to unlocking human cryogenic freezing, stopping life, storing it, and restarting it later. Real-life science fiction, buried in a swamp. You sit with the frozen frog in your hand, marvelling at how something so small and unassuming holds the blueprint for cheating death. Your host, sensing your awe, nods solemnly, then mutters something about the frog being stronger than us all. It's a common local belief that some animals were simply made for this land in a way humans never will be. We have fur coats and space heaters. They have blood that says do your worst. There's a low hum of debate among scientists about just how long these frogs can survive frozen. Some studies claim a few months, others suggest up to 6 or 7, but locals swear they've dug up frogs after nearly a year and watched them spring back to life like it was just a nap. There's no concrete data, only folklore, anecdote, and a long, bitter winter full of strange mysteries. Back at the cabin, your host places the frog gently in a bowl near the stove, not to eat, but to show you. Over the next hour, the ice begins to melt. The frog softens, a leg twitches. You gasp, half convinced this is a trick, but it's not. The frog begins to move, sluggishly at first, then with more intent. Its chest rises, its mouth opens, it blinks, and there it is, a tiny resurrection. You just witnessed something come back from the dead, warmed by fire and patience. No one claps. No one makes a big deal. Your host shrugs like it's just another Tuesday miracle. He picks up the frog and carries it outside, gently placing it in a sheltered spot where it can continue to thaw naturally and make its way back to the wild when it's ready. That night, the conversation at dinner circles around the idea of hibernation, not just for frogs, but for people. One older man insists humans should hibernate, that we've lost something essential by staying active all year. He argues that winter was never meant to be fought, only endured quietly, like the frog, like the bear, like old seeds in frozen soil. His theory? Maybe depression isn't a flaw. Maybe it's the body trying to go still in the season of silence. Someone laughs, someone else agrees, someone passes more soup. The scholarly debate lingers in your mind as you lie down later. Should humans adapt their lives more to the seasons? Do we push too hard, hustle too much, try too desperately to function when the world is telling us to pause? Maybe the cold isn't a punishment. Maybe it's an invitation to rest, to slow down, to freeze, just a little, and come back when the thaw returns. Outside, the wind scratches against the cabin like a polite visitor. Inside, the stove glows. The frog is gone now, vanished into the snow like a ghost with a heartbeat, and you somehow feel just a little more alive than before. It's getting harder to remember what warmth actually feels like. Not surface-level warmth, not the quick rush from a cup of tea, or the 10 seconds your hands hover over the stove, but true, deep core, summer on your skin warmth. That long-forgotten sensation of heat not just outside you, but in you. It's gone, evaporated, burned away by nights of -70 degrees Fahrenheit air and days spent wrapped in more layers than an archaeological dig. You've stopped chasing comfort. Now you just chase not freezing, and weirdly, you're fine with that. This morning you get a rare offer from your host, a chance to pick something from the storage chest. Not food, not gear, clothes, real vintage fur, Soviet era no less. Your curiosity ignites immediately. You follow him into a side room that's more archive than closet, filled with furs, boots and garments thick with the smell of age and smoke and something you can't quite place, possibly bear. The light is dim, the air cold, and the walls lined with hooks and shelves stacked with folded bundles that might as well be treasure. He pulls out a coat, heavy, deep brown. Musk ox fur, he says with pride, running his hands across it like it's a luxury car. It's stitched with reindeer sinew and lined with thick felt. The thing weighs almost as much as a small child. You slip it on and immediately feel like you've been vacuum sealed in a furnace. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. And most of all, it works. It was made for this cold. Not to fight it, but to live inside it. These coats aren't fashion statements. They're survival artifacts, and they're rare now. Back in Soviet times, people made do with what they had, meaning they had fur. Not the sleek, polished kind you see in high-end boutiques, but real, rugged fur that came from a time when trapping wasn't just a job, it was a necessary evil in the war against the cold. Here's your historical fact. During the Soviet Union's expansion into the far north, fur production was a major industry, both economically and strategically. Fur wasn't just exported for profit. It was standard issue gear for meteorologists, geologists, military personnel and labourers stationed in Siberia. A proper Soviet fur coat made from wolf, fox or musk ox was considered essential equipment. Without it, you were toast, or more accurately an unfrozen popsicle waiting to shatter. What people rarely talk about is how political those coats became. Certain types of fur, like silver fox, were reserved for higher-ranking officials. Others, like squirrel or rabbit, were for workers and peasants. What you wore could signal your status. And in a society where resources were controlled by the state, Having access to the right fur sometimes said more about you than your rank. You walk through the village that afternoon wearing your new relic, and the reactions are immediate. Elderly women nod in approval. A boy runs up to touch the sleeve. Even your host looks you over and gives a curt, satisfied nod. It's like you've earned a badge. You're not just wearing warmth, you're wearing history. That leads naturally to the next stop of the day, an old, slightly crumbling shed near the edge of town where one of the elders keeps what might be the last collection of Soviet winter gear in the region. Inside, it's part museum, part survivalist dream. Wooden snowshoes, reindeer hide sleeping bags, even a set of goggles made from thin metal and lined with felt. And in the back, a small yellowing box labelled simply Project Moroz. Project Moroz or Project Frost. It's half covered in dust. Your host opens it carefully. Inside are photographs, handwritten reports, and faded blueprints. You look closer. The documents describe Soviet attempts to develop winter gear for extreme climates, not just for human use, but military deployment in potential Arctic combat scenarios. Yes, you read that right. The Soviets once tried to weaponize winter. Here's your offbeat fact of the day. During the Cold War, both the USSR and the US explored the concept of fighting in polar conditions. Soviet researchers tested everything from thermal weapon storage to ultra-insulated tanks and silent snowmobiles. Some of it made it past prototype. Some was abandoned in remote testing zones so cold and inaccessible that they were never reclaimed. There's talk, half fact, half urban legend, of a lost convoy of Soviet Arctic soldiers buried beneath the ice, frozen mid-March during an experimental winter drill. The scholarly debate that follows this rabbit hole is a big one. Did the Cold War accelerate cold weather innovation? Some say yes. It pushed the limits of human endurance and led to the invention of new insulation materials, boots, shelters, and even emergency rations. Others argue the advancements were overhyped, and that traditional indigenous knowledge was often ignored or plagiarized by Soviet engineers who claimed credit for designs rooted in centuries-old methods. It's a complex history, woven between wool and red tape. Back in the cabin, you inspect the coat more closely. The stitching is fraying in places. The interior lining is patched with what looks like old curtain fabric, but it's held up, decades later, in colder temperatures than most modern parkas could dream of. You try on a fur hat next, the kind with flaps that tie under your chin. It's absurdly warm, almost too warm. You immediately begin to sweat, which is a dangerous game in this climate. Sweat here is the enemy. Wet clothes can freeze faster than you can peel them off. You take the hat back off. Lesson learned. That night you sit by the fire in your inherited coat, feeling like you've been inducted into a club. Not of warmth, not of fashion, but of survival through story. This fur saw winters long before you were born. It carried someone across snow-covered fields, into howling storms, through nights darker than this one. Now it carries you. You can't help but feel a little jealous of the coat. It's weathered more than most people ever will, and it's still standing. Still warm, still useful. That's something to aspire to. As the fire dims and the wind presses its palms against the windows, you wonder, how many stories are wrapped up in fur like this? Not told, not written, just lived. One frost-bitten morning at a time. Night has stretched into its usual half-eternity, and the cold outside has grown mean again. Not loud or dramatic. No, this is the quiet kind of cold. The kind that lurks. It doesn't howl. It waits. You press your hand against the window and feel the chill gnawing at the glass like some invisible animal. The stars look too close tonight, too sharp. It's like the sky cracked open and spilled diamonds all over the black. No clouds, no moon, just endless space and a temperature that wants to make art out of your eyelashes. Your host tells you tonight is a good night to watch the aurora. If your soul can take it, he adds with a smirk, which seems like a dramatic thing to say about a colourful light show. But you've learned to stop questioning ominous Siberian sayings. If someone who survived 70 winters tells you the sky might mess with your head, you believe them. You bundle up again and step outside. The cold hits differently at night. It's more personal, more intimate, like it knows your name now. You walk out past the cabins, past the trees, into an open space near the frozen river. Everything crunches beneath you. Even the river itself moans faintly, a deep, ancient creek that reminds you it's still alive under all that ice. Then you see it. It starts as a smear, greenish, faint, almost like your eyes are adjusting wrong. Then it stretches, curls, dances, green, white, hints of violet, twisting across the sky like silk in slow motion. The aurora borealis, you've seen photos. You thought you knew what to expect, you didn't. It's not a show, it's a presence. The sky stops being sky. It becomes a painting that refuses to hold still. You stand frozen, not from cold this time, but awe. It's beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful, and it moves, like it's aware of you, as if it's watching back. Your host stands beside you, nodding slowly. He says in Yakut, then translates, "The spirits are walking." He's only half joking. There's a long-held belief among locals that the aurora isn't just a phenomenon, but a force, something alive, or at least connected to life. Some call it the breath of ancestors, others say it's a river of souls. Either way, nobody stares at it for too long. You get a few minutes to marvel before it's considered wise to look away. That's when he starts telling you about the hysteria. Here's your historical fact. Polar explorers and Arctic workers have long reported strange psychological episodes during prolonged exposure to deep winter conditions, especially when auroras are present. In the 19th century, some expeditions documented what they called Arctic madness, a mix of insomnia, hallucinations, paranoia, and in extreme cases, violent outbursts. These weren't isolated cases. Whole crews of hardened sailors would grow erratic under the aurora-lit skies, sometimes wandering off into the snow without reason, never to return. One French scientist in 1912 described the aurora as a melody of light that sings directly to the mind, claiming it gave him lucid dreams for weeks afterward. Another, a Soviet researcher stationed near Yakutia in the 1950s, reported that his team stopped speaking entirely for days during a particularly active geomagnetic storm. When they came back, none of them remembered why they'd gone quiet. Of course, modern science offers a few explanations. Lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms. Vitamin D deficiency impacts mood. Long periods of cold exposure can lead to changes in blood flow to the brain. And yes, strong auroras are caused by solar particles interacting with Earth's magnetic field, possibly influencing mental states, especially in sensitive individuals. But there's still no solid consensus on why some people get jittery, spaced out, or completely unglued under these skies. And now your fringe fact. In some parts of the Arctic, indigenous cultures traditionally forbid whistling at the aurora. They believe it's disrespectful, that the lights might mistake the sound for a summons. In Alaska, Inuit stories say the aurora can reach down and snatch people away if they draw attention to themselves. In parts of northern Russia, it's said that mimicking the movements of the lights will invite spirits to follow you home. No one ever wants to be followed home out here. Standing under that swirling sky, you get it. There's something about the aurora that feels too big, too strange. You feel small, fragile. You're wrapped in furs, you've eaten a pound of reindeer fat. Your core temperature is holding steady. But the aurora doesn't care. It glides above, shifting slowly as if dragging time behind it. It doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't warm the night. It just is. Your host finally breaks the silence. "That's enough," he says, and you both turn back. No one speaks on the walk home. The only sound is the squeak of snow and the occasional snap of distant ice shifting. You glance back once and the lights are still dancing like they're teasing you. But you keep walking. Inside the cabin, everything feels closer. The fire, the shadows, even the walls. You sit near the stove, not quite ready to speak. That's when your host says something that sticks. It's not the cold that drives people mad. It's the silence, the stars, the things that don't move but feel alive. The scholarly debate that night, at least in your head, is whether the aurora actually affects the mind, or if the mind simply wants to be affected. Maybe it's the loneliness, the isolation, the pressure of the sky pressing down. Or maybe, just maybe, there are things in this world we still don't understand. Lights in the sky that whisper secrets no one wants to hear. You go to bed with the image burned into your eyes. Green silk, dancing shadows, a sky that doesn't blink. You pull the blankets tighter than usual. The wind is calm, but you don't feel calm. Not yet. Tomorrow the sky will be just sky again. Just stars, just space. But tonight, the spirits walked. You wake up with your face half frozen to your blanket. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. Just a little skin adhesion, nothing permanent, but still not exactly the kind of wake-up call you'd hope for. You peel yourself free, swing your legs over the edge of the cot, and wince as your toes make contact with your boots, which, despite being dry, feel like they've been stored in the freezer overnight, which technically they have. Your eyelashes crunch when you blink. Your lips are so chapped they feel like leather, and when you look in the mirror, or at least the reflective side of the old aluminum kettle, you notice something that makes you pause. Your eyebrows are white, not from age, from ice. Frozen condensation, layered from the inside out. You look like a cartoon wizard who got caught in a blizzard halfway through a spell. You rub at them with a gloved hand, cracking off tiny frost chips like dandruff from a glacier. This is your face now. This is fashion, oymyakon style. And speaking of fashion, today's the day you learn about the kind of clothing that actually keeps humans alive here. Not what you brought, not what you think you need, but what really works. You start with the boots. Unti, made from reindeer leg skin, hair side out, insulated with dry grass. They're hideous. They're also better than anything you'll find at REI. They bend with your foot, hold in heat, and don't freeze solid like synthetic materials. The locals wear them without socks. Socks trap moisture. Moisture freezes. Frozen toes fall off. So, yeah, no socks. That took a few centuries to figure out. Then come the pants. Fur-lined, made from thick canvas or hide. You tie them at the waist with a woven belt made from yak hair or, in older days, braided sinew. The goal is to create as many insulating layers as possible without suffocating yourself. And no, this isn't about staying stylish. Nobody's coordinating colours. Nobody's posting snow selfies in matching puffer sets. The goal is warmth and movement. Survival couture. Your host shows you how to wrap your midsection with a sash of felt and wool before adding the coat. It feels excessive. It's not. The kidneys are one of the first organs to suffer in prolonged cold, and locals swear by keeping that area as warm as possible. Some even tuck hot stones into the sash for long walks. Primitive heating pads with the added bonus of not exploding like lithium batteries in the cold. Next up is the hat. You've seen versions of it before, the classic trapper style with ear flaps and thick fur, but this one is different. It's lined with squirrel fur, denser than fox, softer than rabbit, and stitched by hand with red thread. There's a pattern on the crown that looks ceremonial. Your host calls it the luck knot, meant to keep the wind from stealing your thoughts. You laugh. He doesn't. And here's a fun historical truth. Traditional cold weather fashion in Siberia wasn't just functional, it was sacred. The Yakut people believed the cold was a living force, something with intent and will. Clothing wasn't merely protection, it was armour against a sentient enemy. Herders and hunters would often sew small charms into the linings of their coats, pieces of metal, carved bone, or knots of animal hair, to confuse the spirits of frost. Some even whispered to their garments before heading out, like giving a pep talk to a friend who might be carrying your life in its seams. You ask your host if that's still a thing now. He shrugs. We still whisper, he says, but mostly when the zippers break. Then comes the moment you've been dreading, the makeup conversation. Not because you're planning a runway walk, but because the cold doesn't care if you're beautiful. It cares if your face can still move. And for many women here, frostbite fashion is a daily hazard. Mascara, it freezes. Eyeliner becomes brittle and flakes off in black little curls. Lip balm, only if it's petroleum-based and doesn't trap moisture. Anything else can actually increase your chance of frostnip. And yes, people still wear makeup here. Carefully, skillfully, definitely. On festival days and weddings, women decorate their faces with traditional patterns, tiny dots or lines meant to invoke protection, beauty, or blessings. These aren't drawn with ink or paint though. They're etched with the tip of a heated needle and filled with ash, a kind of ceremonial tattooing that dates back thousands of years. Most modern Yakut don't practice the art anymore, but a few older women in the village still bear the markings, fading and proud. Here's your quirky fact. In the coldest parts of Siberia, eyelashes are considered a health barometer. Locals often glance at each other's faces not just for frostbite, but for how heavily the lashes are frozen. If they're clumped and white within minutes, that's a -50 day or worse. No need for a weather app, just blink and check. Tonight, the debate around the fire isn't about fashion so much as fabrics. One of the men insists that synthetic insulation, like Thinsulate and Gore-Tex, will never outlast fur. Another argues that modern gear is lighter, faster to dry and better for movement. They go back and forth, bringing up stories of hunting trips and near-death hikes. until someone pulls out a fur mitt the size of a baby elephant and declares it the winner by sheer weight. There's no scholarly consensus either. Some research supports traditional clothing as more effective in extreme cold due to breathability and moisture control. Other studies highlight how modern materials are catching up, or even surpassing natural options, at least in laboratory tests. But the lab isn't the tiger. You can't simulate a negative 70-degree Fahrenheit wind licking your ear for 3 hours while you haul a frozen log up a hill. You crawl into bed that night feeling like a stuffed animal, layered, bundled, swaddled in warmth that someone else invented before electric blankets existed. You've learned to dress like the cold means it, like it's watching, like it's just waiting for your scarf to slip. Your eyebrows are still frozen. You don't care. You're warm, for now. There are some things that should make no sense, but work anyway. Like snow being warm. That's today's lesson. You wake up in the usual icy haze, your eyelashes crusted, your toes numb, your skin stiff like it's been half mummified overnight. But there's something different in the air. Your host is already moving around, muttering about old ways, pulling out tools you haven't seen yet. Wooden spades, short saws, a wide snow knife carved from reindeer bone. He tosses you a second pair of mittens, extra thick, and says, "We're building." You blink at him, bleary. "Building what?" He grins. "An igloo." Now, let's clear something up. The image that just popped into your head, perfectly rounded white dome, cartoon Eskimo waving from the front door, isn't exactly what you're about to build. That's the stuff of holiday specials and snow globe fantasy. The real thing is rawer, grittier, and surprisingly practical. And no, the people of Yakutia aren't Inuit, but in a place this cold, good ideas migrate across cultures. Snow shelters work, always have, always will. You march out into the open, the sky a pale iron grey above you, and begin. First step, finding the right kind of snow. Not fluffy powder, that's useless. You need hard-packed, wind-blown snow with just enough density to cut and stack. You stomp through the field until you hit that signature crunch. Dense, brittle, almost like styrofoam. Perfect. Your host shows you how to saw it into blocks. Big rectangular bricks about the size of a seat cushion. They're surprisingly heavy, and you have to carry them carefully so they don't crack. You arrange the first layer in a loose circle, then comes the spiral. Each block is tilted slightly inward, forming a slope that will eventually arch into a dome. The roof is closed with a keystone block like topping off a stone arch. No glue, no mortar, just snow-locking snow into place. It takes hours. Your face is numb. Your fingers, despite the mittens, feel like frozen carrots. But the structure starts to take shape, white walls rising from the earth like a miniature ice fortress. When you place the final block, the moment is weirdly satisfying. You crawl inside, and the silence is instant. Outside, the wind rages. Inside, it's like the volume knob got snapped off. It's not just quieter, it's still. The walls absorb sound, dampen it. Your own breath sounds enormous, and somehow, despite being made of literal frozen water, it's warm. Not summer warm, obviously, but not dead warm. You could survive in here. Easy. That's the secret. Snow is an incredible insulator. The air trapped inside it holds heat, while the curved walls reflect your body's warmth back at you. Add a candle or a small fire pit, and temperatures can rise by dozens of degrees. In a place where the air tries to kill you on contact, that's a miracle made of the very stuff covering the ground. Here's your historical nugget for the night. Snow shelters, known by many names depending on the culture, including igloo, quinsy, and Chukcha yurt, have been used by Arctic and subarctic peoples for millennia. They were not only winter homes, but emergency shelters for hunters and travellers. The Inuit, of course, perfected the design, shaping blocks into wind-resistant domes with entrance tunnels to keep out drafts. The Evenki and Chukchi peoples of Siberia built their own versions, sometimes with animal hides stretched over the snow to make them more durable. And here's your fringe fact. Some explorers and researchers claim that snow shelters are so efficient they've been used as makeshift freezers in reverse. That is, in extreme cold, building a snow shelter actually warms up the internal temperature to a point where meat inside won't freeze solid. In other words, it's warmer inside the snow house than outside your freezer at home. Mind-bending, but true. Of course there's debate. Always is. Some scholars argue that these structures aren't feasible in temperatures as low as Oymyakons. Snow becomes too dry and brittle, they say. but the locals roll their eyes at that. They've built them. The key isn't just the snow, they argue, it's technique, patience, timing, knowing how to read the snow, how to stack and carve. Western gearheads can debate all they want in their heated labs. Out here you either build the thing or freeze. As the day drags on, your igloo becomes not just a structure but a symbol. It's small, sure, crude, more igloo adjacent than masterpiece, but it's yours. You helped build something that turns killer snow into shelter, something that uses the enemy as the armor. That's what survival looks like here. Not brute strength, not fancy gadgets, just using the cold against itself. That evening, your host lights a small candle inside. The flame flickers, throwing warm, golden shapes on the walls. You sit on a bed of pine branches, your back against a snow wall, your breath forming gentle clouds. It's absurd, really. A building made of snow, a house inside winter, a quiet, improbable success story. You sip tea from a thermos and listen to the sound of nothing. No wind, no stove creaking, just you and the frozen hush of your shelter. And for the first time in days, your body relaxes, not because it's warm exactly, but because it's no longer in danger. The cold is still out there, but it can't get to you here, not tonight. Later you return to the cabin, but you leave the igloo standing. A backup plan, a monument, maybe a small rebellion. You're not sure, but something about it makes you feel taller. Snow shouldn't be warm, but here, tonight, it is. You've heard it mentioned a few times now, between bowls of soup and fire-stoked silences, this quiet, almost passive-aggressive rivalry between Oymyakon and another place you've never heard of, Verkhoyansk. It sounds like a made-up city from a spy novel, but it's very real, very cold, and very competitive. See, there's a war going on. Not the kind with tanks and flags. This is the battle of the thermometers, and it's been raging for decades. It starts innocently enough. Someone jokes about how their cousin in Verkhoyansk wears a parka when it's only -50. Everyone laughs, but you can tell there's heat under that frost. Not actual heat, of course, this is still Siberia, but the slow, burning pride of people who've built their entire lives around one insane badge of honor, living in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. You sit down with a local schoolteacher who's also unofficially the town's archivist. She pulls out a binder that's been repaired so many times the duct tape has duct tape. Inside, temperature logs, maps, newspaper clippings, and copies of letters exchanged between weather stations from the Soviet era through the early 2000s. She lays it all out like she's about to present evidence in court, because in a way she is. Here's the claim. Oymyakon holds the record for the lowest officially recorded temperature in any permanently inhabited settlement, -71.2 degrees Celsius, or -96.2 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded in 1926. Verified, stamped, and still proudly displayed on a monument at the edge of town. End of story, right? Not quite. Verkhoyansk, located roughly 400 miles to the northwest, claims it hit the same temperature, -67.8 degrees Celsius, in 1892, a few decades earlier. But their reading came with fewer verification tools, different instruments, less oversight, and a healthy dose of skepticism from meteorologists who say it might not have been entirely reliable. Still, Verkhoyansk won't back down. To them, they were first. To Oymyakon, they were almost right. Then, to complicate everything, modern satellite data enter the chat. Here's your historical note. In 2020, a satellite-based reading picked up a surface temperature in Verkhoyansk of 38 degrees Celsius, or 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Not low, but high, the hottest ever recorded above the Arctic Circle. This made headlines, raised eyebrows, and reignited the rivalry. Now, Verkhoyansk was not only one of the coldest places on Earth, but somehow also among the hottest. Oymyakon didn't take this well. Being the coldest place on Earth isn't just a fun fact here, it's the soul of the town. So how does a village handle losing its claim to fame? Short answer, it doesn't. Instead, it doubles down. The teacher shows you photographs of older thermometers used in the 1920s, thick glass tubes with mercury sealed into handcrafted wooden mounts. She points out how records were written in ledger books, verified by independent observers from Moscow. She even shows a weather map from 1933 circled in red ink showing Oymyakon with the lowest temperatures in the hemisphere. You nod like a good student. You get it now. This isn't about bragging rights. This is about identity. Then comes the fringe fact. During the height of this temperature tug-of-war, a rumour spread that Oymyakon had intentionally destroyed the Verkhoyansk weather station's instruments in the 1970s. Allegedly, a rogue technician, furious about a rival reading being published, snuck into Verkhoyansk and tampered with the mercury thermometers. There's no proof. The technician in question disappeared. Maybe he moved to warmer pastures, maybe the permafrost claimed him, but the story still lives on, told in whispers over cups of boiling tea. Back at the cabin, your host seems amused by your curiosity. He offers you a different perspective. Cold isn't a contest, he says, folding a piece of firewood like it owes him money. It's a wall. You either get through it, or you don't. Verkhoyansk, Oymyakon. We both live behind the wall. Still, you sense the pride, even in his dismissal. He gestures to the thick curtains, the frozen buckets, the coat still steaming in the corner from your earlier walk. If we weren't the coldest, he says, we wouldn't still be here. You nod, and the conversation shifts to the weather for the week. Another cold front is coming in. The pipes might freeze again. The school might close for a day. Maybe. Probably not. The scholarly debate as it stands centres on how we define coldest. Is it based on a single, isolated temperature reading from a century ago? Is it an average over decades? Is it the lived experience of cold, how people build, eat, work and breathe under a sky that might kill them? Statisticians, meteorologists and climate historians each have their take. But the people who live here don't care about your spreadsheets. They know what the inside of your lungs feels like when it hits -70. That's all the proof they need. Before bed, you walk back out to the monument, a stone pillar with a plaque etched in Cyrillic, honouring the record-setting cold of 1926. You stand there, breath clouding the air, stars overhead like frozen sparks. A crow flies overhead, its wings silent, its path slow. You place your hand on the stone. It's colder than anything you've touched before, not in degrees, in weight. This monument isn't just about numbers, it's a gravestone for comfort, a shrine to stubbornness, a weather report turned into a religion, and whether Verkhoyansk accepts it or not, out here in Oymyakon, this is sacred ground. You head back to the warmth, thinking about thermometers and legends and rival towns separated by hundreds of miles of snow and pride. You're not sure who really holds the title, but you do know this. You wouldn't want to be caught outside in either one. You're getting used to the silence, the way it fills a room like insulation. It doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels like a texture, like something you can wrap around yourself. But what you're not used to is the moment you wake up and realise you're warm. Not just not cold, but actually warm. The fire's still going, your feet are toasty inside their felt wrappings, and the usual warning crackle in your joints hasn't kicked in. For one gloriously disorienting moment, you feel like you're back in the real world, the not freezing one, where waking up doesn't require moral courage. That feeling lasts exactly 7 seconds. Then you remember you're in Oymyakon, the coldest inhabited place on Earth, and that it's 5 a.m, and you're about to learn what it takes to sleep without dying. The irony isn't lost on you. Out here you can build snow shelters, eat raw frozen fish, survive diesel engine failures and frog resurrections, but nothing is quite as delicate as bedtime. Because sleep, for all its cosy associations, is a risk. It's when your body lets go, when your awareness drops, when the fire burns low and death sneaks in on cold feet. Your host shows you the routine, and it's not so much a bedtime ritual as it is a military operation. Step 1. The fire. You don't just throw in logs and hope for the best. There's a system. First, a base of thick embers, then 2 layers of different wood types, one for slow burn, one for fast catch, then the stone. A large, flat river stone heated beside the fire, then wrapped in felt and tucked under the blanket at the foot of the bed. The Yakult hot water bottle, except it won't leak or crack when it freezes. You touch the stone with your fingers. It's radiating quiet heat like a sleeping animal. Next, you wrap your feet. Not with socks, not with thermal booties, but with strips of cloth, traditional bindings passed down through generations. The goal is to keep circulation steady, not strangled. Too tight, and you risk frostbite from pressure. Too loose, and heat escapes. It takes practice, and thick fingers moving through multiple layers of wool don't help. Then come the layers. You're not just dressing for bed, you're suiting up for unconsciousness in hostile territory. A base layer of thermals, then a felt tunic that makes you look like an underprepared knight. Then the outer layer, reindeer hide lined with wool. You crawl under your covers, thick blankets, a fur pelt, and finally, a wind-blocking sheet of heavy cloth suspended above the bed like a curtain. You look less like someone sleeping and more like someone being preserved for archaeological study. You lie still, the warmth holds, the fire crackles, but here's the thing, no one sleeps through the night, not here. Around 2 a.m. the fire starts to die down. You wake up, not with a start but with a cold whisper crawling up your legs. It's your body's internal alarm. Too cold, too soon. Time to move. You swing out of bed, teeth clenched, and make your way to the stove. You don't turn on a light, there is no light. You work by memory, by touch, by the glow of a single ember deep in the belly of the iron stove. You feed it one log, then another. You wait. You watch the flame catch. Only then do you crawl back into bed, body steaming slightly like meat in a smoker. This is normal. Every night someone has stove duty. Sometimes it's rotated. In smaller homes, everyone takes a turn. In larger ones, it's the lightest sleeper, or the one with the strongest bladder. Since you're getting up to use the outhouse anyway, might as well stoke the fire while you're at it. Here's your historical truth. Before electricity reached Siberia's far corners, fire maintenance was the central task of winter living. In traditional yurts and cabins, the hearth was sacred, not just the heart of the home, but its lungs. Letting the fire die was a punishable offence in some communities, not legally maybe, but socially. In the worst stretches of winter, your fire was your worth. The warmth you kept wasn't just for you, it was for everyone inside. And here's a niche fact to keep you up at night. In extremely cold weather, a human body can lose consciousness in under 5 minutes if left exposed during sleep. Not because of exposure in the traditional sense, but because your body's natural temperature dips as you rest, especially during REM. Add a small air leak, a shift in the blanket, or a drop in fire heat, and your core temperature can drop faster than you'd expect. People have died in their sleep out here, not from hypothermia, but from cooling down too soon. There's ongoing scientific debate about the use of thermal sleeping gear in extreme environments. Some experts argue that over-insulating the body can backfire, trapping sweat that then freezes, causing a dangerous cooling effect. Others insist more insulation is always better, especially with moisture-wicking materials. But here, in Oymyakon, the answer is simpler. Don't trust anything completely. Sleep in layers, keep the fire alive, and never ignore that whisper of cold on your ankle. It's not being polite, it's warning you. Tonight you sleep with your back to the wall, the fire at your feet, and the hot stone tucked under your blanket. It radiates a slow, steady heat, barely noticeable at first, but you feel it holding you like a presence. The kind that's older than you, the kind that remembers harder winters than this. You dream, finally, of something warm. You don't know what it is exactly, just sunlight. A field, maybe. The sound of birds. Things that feel fake now. But you hold on to it as long as you can. And when you wake up, you're still warm. Not lucky, just prepared. The wind is howling again, louder this time, urgent and unsettled. You wake to the kind of noise that doesn't rattle windows. It presses on them, like something wants in. The cabin creaks. The fire's out. Your breath fogs the air with a vengeance. You reach for your boots, half frozen again, and jam your feet into them with a hiss. Today isn't going to be gentle. Your host is already up, pacing by the window in full winter gear. He says 2 words, samolyot zamyots. The plane froze. You think it's a metaphor. You're wrong. Turns out someone's been living inside a frozen Soviet-era aircraft on the far edge of the village, a downed and 2 biplane that crash-landed here sometime in the late 70s and was never retrieved. It's been there ever since, like a half-buried fossil, too heavy to move, too stubborn to disappear. Locals call it the steel bird, though it hasn't flown in decades. At first, it was a joke, then a storage space. Then, sometime after the collapse of the USSR, it became a shelter, and now someone's calling it home. The man in question is Ivan. No one knows his last name, or maybe they do and just don't care. Ivan's the sort of guy who arrived one day with a broken snowmobile, fixed it with a wrench and some chewing gum, and never left. He moved into the plane after his cabin burned down 2 winters ago. Didn't ask permission, didn't apologise, just swept out the cockpit and nailed a stove into the cargo hold. People nodded and let him be, but last night something went wrong. The wind snapped a nearby pine tree which collapsed onto the fuselage, breaking a small hole in the roof. With the fire out and no insulation besides old aircraft parts and reindeer skins, the plane froze from the inside out. Even didn't freeze. He's fine, or at least still moving, but he's in trouble. So now, you and your host are trudging across the snow to help the man who lives in a plane. The walk is brutal, wind clawing at your face, snow carving sideways like razor dust. You pass fields buried in drifts so high they look like waves frozen mid-break. The world is washed white, and visibility is garbage. But you push forward, guided by the shape of the aircraft's tail, sticking up from the snow like a weathered monument to a time when things could still fall from the sky. When you reach it, the damage is obvious. A section of the fuselage has peeled open like a sardine can. Ivan greets you with a grin, covered in soot, wrapped in a blanket that looks like it was once part of a military sleeping bag. He shrugs. Wind, he says, like it explains everything, which here it kind of does. Inside, the plane is bizarre. There's a tiny stove in the corner, made from scavenged parts, a tin chimney poking through a window sealed with what looks like melted plastic. The pilot's seat is gone, replaced with a padded bench and a pile of firewood. The walls are lined with old aviation maps, Soviet flags, and a few tin pots hanging like relics from a post-apocalyptic museum. You help him patch the roof with a slab of scrap metal and snow-packed felt, stuffing every crack with moss and frozen rags. It's temporary. Everything here is. The goal is just to keep the cold slower than usual. It's not about stopping it, just outlasting it, for now. Here's your historical gem. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, many aircraft and military vehicles were abandoned in Siberia. Logistics collapsed, fuel shortages paralysed transport, and entire convoys of equipment were left behind in remote regions. Locals quickly adapted, repurposing planes, trucks, and even tanks into storage units, workshops, and yes, homes. The cold preserved them better than any museum. In Oymyakon, the plane is one of dozens scattered across the Republic like bones of an empire. And now your fringe fact. Some remote settlements have reported strange phenomena near these abandoned aircraft. Magnetic disturbances, radios behaving erratically, even compass readings drifting off. Some believe it's the old electronics interacting with the extreme cold. Others say it's leftover energy from when the machine still had purpose. But out here, no one really cares why it happens. They just learn where not to stand. The scholarly debate on this one's layered. Should these relics be preserved, documented, maybe even retrieved for historical purposes? Or are they better left as they are? Silent reminders that history sometimes freezes too. Anthropologists argue over it. Some say these sites are cultural fossils worth studying. Others believe disturbing them would erase the raw, lived-in truth they now represent. By the time the repairs are done, Ivan is making tea in an old aviation fuel can. He pours you a cup. It tastes like metal and pine smoke and something you can't identify. Maybe rust. You drink it anyway. He offers you a seat on a broken wing flap and starts telling stories. About the plane, about the day it landed, how it sputtered out over the river, clipped a ridge, and skidded to a soft crash in the middle of a snowstorm. The pilot apparently survived. Walked for 2 days through the storm to reach the village. They gave him soup, fixed his boots, and sent him on his way. The plane stayed. You ask Ivan if he ever thinks about leaving. He laughs so hard he chokes on his tea. Leave what, he says, gesturing to the white all around. There is nowhere else. Only warmer places, and in warm places people forget things. On the walk back, the wind eases a little. The clouds open just enough to reveal a dull sun, the kind that offers no heat but reminds you it's still technically out there. You think about Ivan, alone in his metal cave, surrounded by snow and time and stories no one else will ever hear. It's strange, but not sad. In fact, you kind of get it. The cold doesn't stop everything. Sometimes it preserves, like amber, or a plane that became a home, or a man who decided that if the world wouldn't come to him, he'd live in what fell from it. The wind has died, finally. After days of biting gales and that constant low howl in the eaves, the sudden quiet is suspicious. You step outside and feel it instantly. Stillness. The kind that feels wrong. The sky's overcast, pressed down like a lid on a pot. The snow doesn't sparkle. It just sits, heavy and silent like it's thinking. And the air. The air has that tense, staticky edge, like it's waiting to hear something. Not cold exactly, just watching. That's when the stories start, and you're sitting at the kitchen table drinking something fermented and vaguely berry-like with an old man named Mikhail. He's got the kind of face that looks like it's seen every war and every winter and still didn't flinch. He's not in a hurry to talk, but eventually the conversation circles to something that makes your host roll his eyes before stepping outside to split more firewood, which is basically his way of saying, "Good luck, have fun." Mikhail leans closer, lowering his voice to the universal volume of campfire tales and possible nonsense. "Yeti," he says, tapping his temple. "You hear? You've heard of it, sure. Bigfoot. Abominable snowman. Overgrown wilderness prank with feet too big to buy shoes. But here, in the frozen valleys of Yakutia? Apparently yes. Mikhail tells you the locals call it chuchuna, and that it's not some wandering ape. It's something older, less creature, more warning. Tall, white-furred, silent. It doesn't make noise, doesn't leave prints, just appears near the tree line during the longest cold snaps. He says his uncle saw one once, standing still as a statue across the frozen river, staring. No sound, no movement, just presence. And when they tried to follow its trail, it vanished. No tracks, just gone. You sip your drink. Mikhail watches your face carefully. You don't laugh. He nods approvingly. Your host returns with a bundle of kindling and mutters something about too much vodka and not enough snow to shovel. But later that night, as you sit by the fire, you hear the next tale. This one comes from a woman who swears she heard knocking on the walls of her cabin during a whiteout. 3 slow taps, then nothing, then again, louder. When she opened the door, no one was there, just wind and snow and the faint shape of something slipping into the woods. She didn't follow. She shut the door and slept with an axe in her bed. Here's your historical bite. Russian folklore is filled with forest beings, some harmless, some not. The leshy, a mischievous woodland spirit, was said to lead travellers astray in the woods with laughter and trickery. But in the far north, the stories get darker. The chuchuna appears in oral histories from the Evenki and Yakut people, described not as a mythical creature, but as a rare animal, or spirit, that walks upright and avoids human settlements. Unless something's wrong. It's not a monster, it's a message. And here's your fringe fact of the night. In 1959, a Soviet mountaineering group in the Ural Mountains, far from Oymyakon but still deep in the Russian wild, died mysteriously during what's now called the Dyatlov Pass incident. Their bodies were found scattered, some undressed in freezing temperatures, some with massive internal injuries. One had a tongue missing. Soviet authorities blamed an unknown compelling force. Ever since, theories have ranged from avalanches to secret weapons to, you guessed it, Yetis. The official files were sealed for decades. That's all the fuel a story needs. There's no academic consensus on these tales. Most scholars brush them off as folklore, exaggerated memories, or hallucinations caused by extreme cold, exhaustion, or snow blindness. Others leave room for something stranger. The Siberian wilderness is enormous, underexplored, and still capable of keeping secrets. In places like this, it's not hard to imagine that something has managed to hide. Something big. Something quiet. Something that doesn't want to be seen, until it does. You're not sure what you believe, but when the wind picks up again around midnight and the trees creak just a little too rhythmically, you find yourself staring out the window longer than you should. The forest looks normal, but now it feels crowded. Not with animals, not with people, with possibilities. Later, your host finds you still awake. He doesn't ask why. He just tosses another log on the fire and mutters, "Nothing comes unless you invite it." Then he shrugs, walks to the window, and pulls the curtain shut. That's another rule you didn't know you were breaking. Don't leave the windows open at night. Not because of the cold, but because of what might be watching. Whether it's superstition or survival instinct, it doesn't matter. In a place where nature doesn't blink, sometimes it's better not to look too long. And still, you dream. Of tall figures walking through the woods, of tapping on walls, of eyes like lanterns just beyond the edge of the tree line. You wake up sweating, in Oymyakon. That alone is terrifying. And you wonder, was it just a story? Just fermented berries? Or did something ancient come walking when the wind finally stopped? You don't ask your host. He's already sharpening his axe. Morning comes slowly, or maybe it just stops being night. You've given up on clocks out here. Sunlight means nothing when it only barely scrapes the edge of the sky and then vanishes again like it changed its mind. Still, You know it's time to get up because your body has that certain ache, the one that says you've been horizontal for too long in the same 3 positions, wrapped like a poorly stored burrito. Today's goal, bathing. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's no spa trip coming, no bubble bath, no steaming modern shower with 17 spray settings. What you're about to experience is an art form practiced in some of the most unforgiving corners of the world. It's part purification, part punishment, part ancient engineering. Your host calls it banya, the Russian steam bath. And in Oymyakon, where you can feel your teeth harden from the cold, it might be the only time your skin remembers what warmth actually is. The bathhouse is a squat wooden structure behind the cabin, built low to trap heat, with thick log walls that look like they've survived several world wars, and possibly caused 1 or 2. Smoke curls from a crooked pipe in the roof. The snow around it has melted in a perfect ring, the only real sign that something alive exists here. As you step inside, you're hit with a wall of heat so dense it nearly slaps the cold out of your lungs. It smells like smoke, birch, sweat, and something ancient. Inside, the light is dim. There are 3 small rooms, a changing area, a cooling-off space, and the steam room itself. Everything is wood. Benches, floors, walls darkened with decades of steam and sap and time. Your host moves like a man on a mission. He throws water onto the hot stones in the corner of the steam room, and the hiss it produces is immediate. The room fills with vapour that stings your nose and eyes, but in a good way. You sit, you sweat, and then the beating begins. Not metaphorical beating, literal, with venik, bundles of leafy birch branches tied together and soaked in warm water. Your host begins gently whipping your back, then your arms, then your legs. It sounds violent. It isn't. It's rhythmic, almost meditative, the leaves brushing heat into your skin, pushing the cold out like it owes rent. It smells green and earthy. You feel your pores open like flowers in reverse spring. The sweat pours, your ears buzz, your brain goes soft at the edges. Here's your historical fact. The banya tradition stretches back over 1,000 years, possibly even further among Finno-Ugric and Turkic peoples. In Siberia, where the cold kills casually and quickly, the steam bath is more than just hygiene. It's a form of spiritual reset. Russian Orthodox monks used it. Soviet soldiers bathed in mobile versions during the war. Entire villages centered social life around it. Some were even built near rivers to allow winter plunges straight from steam to ice. Cleansing of the body and the soul. And here's your fringe fact for the day. Some old Siberian families believed that illness wasn't truly cured until it was sweated out in the banya. Fevers, colds, broken hearts, everything got steamed. There are reports of women giving birth in banyas. Others held funeral rituals there. It was, and in some places still is, the ultimate equalizer. Birth, death, and everything in between happened between those wooden walls. The steam doesn't care who you are. It strips you down, boils you, and sends you back out purified or panicked. The scholarly debate? It revolves around how exactly the banya impacts health. There are studies showing improved circulation, skin detoxification, and immune boosts. But skeptics argue that extreme temperature swings, especially the kind that involves running from a 180 degree Fahrenheit steam room into negative 60 degree Fahrenheit air, might be more shock than therapy. Of course, ask anyone who's done it for more than a few winters and they'll shrug. If it kills me, they say, at least I'll die clean. You're not dying today, but you do get the full experience. After 20 minutes in the steam, your host barks something that sounds suspiciously like, "Now we suffer," and flings open the door. You step out into the night air, barefoot, soaked and steaming like a cursed spirit. He grabs a bucket of snow, yes, snow, and dumps it over your head. The temperature difference hits like a slap from an ice god. You can't breathe, you can't think, your brain evacuates, but then your body lights up. Every inch of you wakes up like someone flipped a switch. It's pain, then clarity, shock, then a strange sort of joy. You run, sprint, back into the steam room, laughing and swearing and alive in a way you haven't felt since you arrived. You sit back down on the bench, heart pounding, skin burning. The room feels gentler now, the steam forgiving. You've earned your heat. After a few rounds, you lie back on the wooden bench, towel wrapped around your head like some ancient bathhouse deity, and just exist. No cold, No frost, no numb fingers or ice-rimmed eyelashes. Just you and your beating heart and the hiss of water turning to steam. Later you dry off in the cool-down room with thick felt towels. Your hair's damp, your muscles limp. Your host passes you a small shot glass of vodka. Because, of course. To life, he says, knocking it back. And to not freezing in our sleep. You clink glasses. The vodka hits hard. The warmth spreads. And for the first time since arriving in Oymyakon, you feel not just human again, but soft. That dangerous, glorious kind of softness that makes you forget for a second where you are. You step outside once more, letting the cold hit your skin. It's still there. Still brutal. Still endless. But for now it doesn't scare you, because you're clean, you're warm, and the cold hasn't won yet. You've started to understand time differently here. Not in hours or minutes, that kind of thinking broke down days ago. Out here, time is measured in firewood, in cups of tea, in how often you have to knock ice off your eyelashes before you can blink normally again. It stretches and folds in strange ways. A single morning can last forever, but a day can vanish before you've even buttoned your coat. Today, though, time is measured in dogs. You wake to barking, not panicked, not aggressive, just steady, purposeful noise, like the village itself is announcing something. Your host meets you at the door, already dressed, already smiling. Today, he says, you ride. And just like that, you're going dog sledding. The dogs themselves are lean, muscular, and completely uninterested in your approval. They don't wag. They don't roll over. They're too busy working. Each one is harnessed into a tight hand-tied system of ropes and belts, paws twitching with anticipation. Siberian Lycas, mostly. Smaller than the Hollywood Huskies you're used to seeing, but stronger than they look. Built for cold, built for endurance, built for the long, straight silence of the tundra. The sled is simple. Wood runners, a platform, and a seat so close to the ground you can feel the snow as it skims beneath. Your host shows you how to lean, how to brake, how to call out commands. Not that the dogs seem to need them. They know where they're going. They always know. When the sled takes off, it's not explosive. It's smooth, almost floating. The wind in your face is sharp, immediate, but you barely notice. You're moving, flying across snow that stretches in every direction, trees blurring at the edge of your vision like old film. The only sounds are the runners slicing through powder and the soft grunts of the dogs, working together in perfect rhythm. The cold bites at your eyes, your fingers ache, but you're smiling like an idiot. Because this is freedom. Here's your historical fix. Dog sledding has been a cornerstone of survival in the Arctic and subarctic for thousands of years. Long before snowmobiles, before roads, before even the idea of permanent infrastructure, there were dogs and sleds and the people who knew how to use them. Indigenous Siberian peoples like the Chukchi, Evenki and Yakut bred specific dogs for hauling, for scent, for guarding. These weren't pets. They were partners. You didn't own your dogs. You depended on them. In fact, it's believed that the ancestors of today's Siberian Huskies were developed by the Chukchi people precisely for long-distance travel across frozen terrain. Their stamina, coat thickness, and metabolism were fine-tuned by generations of selective breeding. When Arctic exploration began in earnest in the 18th and 19th centuries, these dogs were brought along, not just because they were effective, but because no other animal could do the job. And here's your deliciously strange fringe fact. During the height of Soviet industrial experimentation in the 1950s, a small research group proposed creating a mechanical dog sled, basically a sled powered by a tiny engine, guided by wires instead of reins. The test model worked for exactly 17 minutes before crashing into a frozen pond and exploding in a puff of antifreeze and regret. The dogs watched in silence, then pulled the scientists home. Back on the trail, you pass through a stretch of land your host calls the Listening Place. It's a wide, open valley bordered by birch trees, and when the wind drops just right, you can hear the dogs' breathing echo back to you. Not loudly, just a whisper. It makes the whole team seem twice as big, like there's something else riding alongside you, just out of view. Your host explains, almost casually, that this place has long been considered sacred. Not in a churchy way, but in a bone-deep, don't mess with it way. Travellers passing through used to remove their hats. Even the dogs would quiet down. There's a legend that voices from the past live in this stretch of land, carried by the wind, stored in the frost, waiting for someone to listen. Some say you can hear your ancestors here, if you're quiet. if they feel like talking. Naturally, the scholarly community rolls its collective eyes at such stories. Acoustic anomaly is the preferred explanation. Something about the snowpack and the tree line and the valley-shaped bouncing sound in strange ways. But no one's ever studied it in depth. Too cold, too remote, too hard to fund. Meanwhile, the people who live here just nod and say, "It listens." That's enough. You stop for a break. The dogs curl into themselves, sleeping instantly like soldiers between battles. Your host hands you a chunk of frozen fish wrapped in cloth. It's cold, but your hands are warm from the ride. You eat in silence, your face turned toward the trees, and you swear, just for a moment, you hear something. A voice, number, a memory maybe. Your own breath answering itself in the stillness. On the ride back, the wind picks up. The dogs dig in, leaning into the harnesses, snow flying off their paws in tiny bursts. The sled glides like it was born to. And you? You feel like you've borrowed something ancient, a piece of someone else's story, something primal and pure and earned by cold and patience. When you arrive back at the village, the dogs get fed first. Always. They eat in silence, dignified, focused. You pat one on the head. He ignores you. That's fair. You walk back to the cabin on tired legs, your face crusted with ice, your gloves stiff with sweat. But your heart is light. Your blood is moving. For a few perfect hours, you weren't just surviving out there. You were flying. It's funny how quickly survival becomes routine. What once felt impossible, eating frozen meat with your bare hands, dressing in 5 layers before taking a leak, waking every night to feed a stove that coughs more than it burns, now just feels like Tuesday. The cold doesn't scare you the same way anymore. It's not an enemy now. It's more like a roommate with severe boundaries. Respect it, and it might let you stay. Get cocky, and it'll bury you. But tonight isn't about survival. Not directly. Tonight is about celebration. You're invited to a village gathering. Half feast, half festival, full chaos. There's no official holiday today, no birthday or anniversary. Just a break in the weather, a fresh stock of dried meat, and enough moonlight to make people feel brave. In this part of the world, that's reason enough to party. You follow your host across the snow-packed road toward a building you hadn't even noticed before, hidden behind a screen of trees and frozen brush. It looks like a garage, but inside it's been transformed. Warm lanterns hang from rafters, tables line the walls, someone's dragged in a working radio, and it's playing music that sounds like 1960s folk mixed with a tractor engine. People are laughing, stomping snow off their boots, hugging through layers of fur and wool. The heat hits you like a wall. Body heat, fire, breath, life, and the food. Oh, the food. Smoked fish, dried venison, pickled roots in brine so strong it makes your nose crinkle, boiled fat in blocks, cut like cake, even a batch of sugared berries preserved from the short, frantic summer. You fill your plate, then watch it refill itself as strangers offer you more. Eating is not optional here. It's practically an act of community service. Refuse, and you insult the season. Accept, and you become part of the circle. Someone hands you a cup. It steams. You sip, fermented milk, thick and sour and so aggressively alive it nearly fights its way back up your throat. You blink, cough, laugh. Your host slaps your back, pleased. Now you are one of us. Here's your historical note. Communal feasts have long been the glue of Arctic and subarctic societies. In Yakutia, winter gatherings weren't just about eating, they were declarations. "We're still here," they said. "We made it through another season." These meals functioned as courtship events, town meetings, even low-key therapy sessions. Music, stories, laughter. They warmed places no fire could reach. And your fringe fact. In some regions of the Russian Far East, traditional winter gatherings included contests. Not just strength games or dancing, but endurance rituals. One popular test was the barefoot ring, where participants would stand barefoot in the snow and sing until they either passed out or someone else gave up first. You ask about that tradition now. Your host shakes his head. "That one's gone," he says. "People used to think cold made you strong. Now we know. It just makes you dead." After dinner comes the singing. It starts with a single voice. Old, thin, cracking, but steady. Then others join in. The words are in Saka, the Yakut language, a soft melodic tongue full of long vowels and throat sounds that vibrate like wind through pine. You don't understand the lyrics, but you don't need to. You feel them. Songs of winter, of lost loved ones, of foxes, rivers, hunger, fire. You close your eyes, and suddenly you're in a different time. One where light was firelight and food was never guaranteed. One where singing was a map home. Then come the stories. A woman named Nadia tells one about her grandfather losing his fingers to frostbite while rescuing a reindeer herd during a whiteout. She laughs like it's a bar fight story. A teenager brags about sledding down a hill at minus 60 degrees Celsius in nothing but a shirt and winning a bet that earned him a used radio. Then your host, leaning against the wall, tells a tale that silences the room. It's about a man who got lost in the forest one winter and wandered for days. No food, no fire, no coat even. Everyone assumed he was dead. But he came back on the 6th day, silent, changed, eyes too wide. When they asked him what happened, he said, "I met the cold mother. She didn't take me." Then he never spoke again, just lived out his life quietly, feeding the fire, never going more than a few feet from his door. You ask if the story is real. Your host smiles. As real as cold. This leads naturally into the academic debate of the night. A visiting ethnographer, clearly not from here, tries to make the case that stories like these are cautionary tales rooted in environmental trauma, that they aren't literal, but metaphorical. The room listens politely. Then Nadia raises an eyebrow. And what's metaphorical about negative 72? The room laughs. You step outside for air, your cheeks flushed, your ears ringing with music and drink. The snow reflects the moon like silver poured across the land. You breathe in, and for a second, just a second, you feel invincible. Not because you're strong or smart or brave, but because you're part of something. A human chain of people who stared the cold in the face and said, "Not tonight." Inside, the party rages on. You watch a toddler wrapped in furs toddle past with a hunk of meat in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other. Someone's dancing barefoot on a reindeer hide. An old woman is showing a group of teenagers how to cut frozen marrow from a bone without chipping your teeth. This isn't about escaping the cold. It never was. It's about defying it. And in this tiny room, for this one strange night, humanity wins. You step outside again, hours later, long after the singing's faded, and the fire has gone to soft embers. The cold greets you instantly, not as an enemy this time, but as something patient, waiting. It's still pitch dark, of course. The kind of darkness that doesn't end. It just changes shade. You breathe out, and your exhale hangs in the air like a question. Behind you, the last of the villagers are leaving the gathering hall, bundled and laughing and slapping snow from each other's shoulders like it's nothing. Because here, it really is. You're the only one still feeling impressed that everyone survived the night. For them, it's just Saturday. Your host appears at your side, motioning silently. You follow, no need to ask where. Out here, conversation has slowed with the temperature. You walk through the snow in quiet rhythm, your boots crunching softly as the trees thin around you. The village lights fade behind. The silence thickens, and ahead, the world opens into a frozen field, crusted in moonlight so pale and distant it barely counts as illumination. But it's enough. You reach a clearing and he stops, points, and there it is, sunrise. Or the idea of it anyway. Not the kind of sunrise you'd see at a beach, warm and golden and promising a sweaty day of sunscreen and melted ice cream. This one is barely there. A slice of grey-pink light stretched low across the horizon, like someone whispered colour into the sky. No heat, no drama, just a faint suggestion that the world has turned slightly, and that the night, which has lasted longer than you thought possible, is starting to end. You feel it more than see it. A temperature shift so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't desperate. Your breath doesn't freeze quite as quickly. The snow underfoot squeaks a little less. Somewhere high above, clouds pass like shadows through a sky too brittle to hold them. You blink once, twice, and then the tears start. Not emotional ones, just the kind the cold wrings from your ducts without permission. They freeze on your lashes before you can wipe them. This is what people here call the false morning. It comes long before the real one, and offers no warmth, no relief, just hope. It's the coldest part of the day, paradoxically. The moment before the sun fully returns is when the world tightens its grip the hardest. And still, it's beautiful. You stand there a long time, not moving, not talking. Your host finally breaks the silence with a simple line. That's how you know you're still alive. You're cold, then he smirks. And you haven't turned into a statue yet. He starts walking back. You hesitate just a moment longer, watching the sky shift another fraction of a degree, and you think, this is it. This is what it means to live here. You don't conquer the cold. You don't beat it. You just learn to exist inside it, like a flicker inside a lantern, stubborn and small and burning all the same. Here's your historical footnote to end on. The residents of Oymyakon have witnessed this sunrise more times than they can count, and yet they never stop stepping outside to see it. Generation after generation, wrapped in fur and frostbite scars, they come out to watch the sky admit that morning might eventually exist again. For them, sunrise is never routine. It's proof that the world still works, that time still moves, that they haven't frozen in place even if everything else has. And here's your fringe fact, just for fun. In the 1970s, a French film crew tried to record the sunrise in Oymyakon. Their cameras froze. Their film cracked like glass. One cameraman got mild frostbite on his eyelids. They got 3 usable frames, just 3. But one of them hangs in the village school to this day, a smudge of light in a pale sky, the closest thing to victory you'll ever see on a wall. The scholarly debate, as always, lingers in the background. Why do people stay? In a world full of warm places, convenient places, why choose to live in the jaws of winter? Some researchers chalk it up to identity, tradition, economic roots. Others argue it's about resilience, how humans adapt to hardship until it feels normal, even preferable. But ask the villagers themselves, and you get a different answer. Why not? They've lived here long enough that the question doesn't need explaining. It's not a defiance of nature, it's a partnership. You don't tame the cold, you just learn how to talk to it, how to listen, how to sleep, to walk, to love, and even laugh with it sitting beside you. You return to the cabin slowly as the light starts to build behind the hills. You take your boots off carefully, unwrap the layers like ceremonial armour. The fire is already burning. Your host has made tea. How he got water to boil this fast is one of those mysteries you've stopped questioning. You sit by the stove, warm hands around a steaming mug, and stare into the flame. It crackles gently, a soft heartbeat in the centre of the room, and you think, this was the coldest night in history. Maybe not in absolute numbers. Maybe someone else will challenge it with a new record, a lower thermometer reading a satellite scan. But for you, this was it, and you survived. Hey, you made it. Not just through this section, but through the whole thing. 30 chapters of freezing winds, fur coats made from creatures you never knew existed, frosty breath you could almost stand on, and enough raw fish and reindeer meat to make your stomach question your life choices. You started this journey shivering, skeptical, probably thinking, how cold could it really be? Now you know. Now you feel it. That deep, bone-hollowing kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, it rewrites your sense of what's survivable. You've eaten frozen blood cubes. You've shared a steam room with a man who beat you with leafy sticks. You've built a shelter out of snow and felt proud of it. You've stood under a sky that didn't even pretend to warm you. You've met people who live where thermometers break, where eyelashes freeze solid, and where death by sleep is a nightly risk. And still, they laugh. They cook. They sled. They sing. You didn't just visit the coldest night in history, and you endured it. And if there's a takeaway here, beneath all the frozen boots and diesel engines that died of shame, it's that humans are wild. We settle where we shouldn't. We survive what we weren't designed for. We adapt, adjust, wrap ourselves in animal skin, and build fires that we refuse to let go out. Whether it's a village on the edge of the Arctic Circle, a metal plane turned into a home, or a half-sung folk song passed down in a language no outsider speaks, it all tells you the same thing. We're very hard to kill. Now, as the fire dies down in your own room, and the last flickers of this story settle like fresh snow, take a moment. Listen to the quiet around you. Not the kind you fear, but the kind that holds you, that keeps you. You made it through the night. Sleep well. Word count 300.